A hammer cuts sideways through the dying light, and the revolver hits the mud before the man's hand even understands it's empty. 20 feet. 3 riders with their faces covered. One woman standing on a porch step in a flour-dusted apron, and not one tremor in her hands. Fog lying white across the fence posts. A farmhouse roof leaning into a burnt orange sunset. A door left half shut, and behind it the fast, frightened breathing of a 6-year-old boy. Her eyes. No fear in them. No panic. Only something very old and very cold, opening one eye after 2 years asleep. Then the man on the ground looks up. His face goes the color of ash. He whispers a single word, one name, and it lands in that yard like a second gunshot. Out past the tree line on the eastern ridge, a rider sits motionless in the fog. Watching, the Winchester comes up slow. The fog doesn't lift here. Not really. It just thins out enough to let the light through. 6:40 in the morning, and Addie Marsh is already awake. Has been for an hour. Because sleep never comes easy anymore. Because the bed is too big for one person and too small for the silence that fills it. She used to think that was a strange thing to notice about a bed. Size. As if grief had a measurement. Turns out it does. She's at the well before the rooster even bothers to try. Bucket down. Rope creaking, the cold biting through her sleeves. Her breath fogging in front of her face and disappearing before it finishes forming. And there it is. That sound. Metal against stone, echoing off the barn wall, bouncing back to her like it's asking a question she doesn't want to answer. Which is, how long can a person keep doing this alone? She doesn't answer it. She never does. She just hauls the bucket up. Arms steady, shoulders set, the way her father taught her, before he taught her anything else. Before the guns. Before the letters. Before any of it. Steady hands. That was the first lesson. Everything after that was just detail. She sets the bucket on the lip of the well and stands there a moment, hands braced on the cold stone, looking out at a yard she has walked 10,000 times and still, some mornings, doesn't quite believe belongs to her. Because it wasn't supposed to be hers. Not really. It was supposed to be theirs. Hers and Elias's. A farm built for 2, worked by 2, aged into by 2 gray hair and grandchildren, and a porch swing they never got around to building because there was always something more urgent. The fence. The roof. The well. Now there's just the fence. The roof, the well. And her. The farmhouse behind her groans awake with the wind. Old wood settling into a new day the way it's settled into every day for 11 years. Indifferent to who's inside it. Indifferent to who's missing. Elias's house before it was hers. And now it's just hers. And some mornings that fact still lands like a slap she wasn't braced for. Not every morning. Not anymore. But enough of them. 2 years. That's what everyone says when they mention it. 2 years. Like it's a number that should mean something by now. Like grief comes with a schedule. Like it clocks out, punches its card, goes home at the end of the day and leaves you be. It doesn't. She carries the bucket toward the barn, boots crunching frost, and does the morning's chores the way she does them, every morning methodically, without waste, one task folding into the next, with a rhythm that has nothing to do with farm life and everything to do with the person she was before any of this. Feed the chickens. Check the milk cow's leg, still healing from where she caught it on the fence wire last week. Latch the gate. Unlatch it. Latch it again, because the first latch never quite sits right, and a loose gate in autumn means a loose cow come first snow. She thinks, sometimes, doing these small chores, about how strange it is that the body remembers discipline the mind has tried so hard to forget. She never decided to check the latch twice. She just does. The way she never decided to always sit facing the door in church or always know, without looking, exactly how many steps separate her from the nearest exit in any room she enters. Old training doesn't ask permission. It just stays quiet, patient, in the muscle. Her father started that training, long before anyone else finished it. She still remembers him at this very hour, this exact gray hour before proper sunrise, standing behind her in a different yard, in a different territory, guiding her small hands around the grip of a pistol too heavy for a girl of 8 to hold steady on her own. Breathe out. Not in. Out. You squeeze on the empty part of the breath, Addie girl. Man holds his breath to shoot. His hand shakes without him even knowing it. You let the breath go. Your hand goes still with it. He'd been a lawman once himself. A deputy in 3 territories before the drink took the steadiness out of his own hands and left it, strange as fate, in hers instead. He died when she was 16, coughing into a handkerchief in a rented room above a stable, and the last thing he ever said to her wasn't about love or regret or any of the things a daughter might have wanted to carry forward. It was practical. It was in its own quiet way, the truest thing he ever told her. Don't let anybody talk you into believing steady hands are wasted on a woman. Whoever comes looking to use that gift right will know it the moment they see you hold a gun, and whoever doesn't see it well, that's their failure of eyesight, not yours. A man named Silas Vane saw it inside a year of her father's death. She has spent a great many nights since wondering whether that was fortune or curse, and has never once, in all the years since, managed to settle firmly on an answer. What she does know, standing in her own yard at 40 degrees with a bucket in her hand and a boy calling for her from inside a warm kitchen, is that whatever her father meant by those words, he never once imagined the shape her steadiness would eventually take. Never imagined hallways or gun smoke or a name traded around like currency among men who feared it. He'd imagined, she thinks, something smaller and gentler than that. A woman who could protect a farm, a family, a morning like this one. In the end, that's exactly what the gift became for. It just took the long way getting there. There's a smell that still catches her sometimes. Gun oil and cold morning air together that pulls her straight back to a memory she almost never lets herself visit on purpose. Her father, 3 years before the coughing started, standing at the edge of a different well in a different territory, showing her how to break down a pistol blind by feel alone in case a hand ever needed to do it in the dark. Why blind, Papa? Because the dark doesn't wait for you to find a lamp, Addie girl. Trouble's the same. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. So you get ready before it comes calling, and you get ready in the dark, because that's usually how it shows up. She hadn't understood it then. Not really, it had seemed, at 8 years old, like just another strange rule in a house full of them. She understands it now, standing in a different yard entirely, a lifetime and a marriage and a grave and a son later. Trouble doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send word ahead so a person can tidy up first. It arrives exactly the way her father warned her it would, in the dark, in the cold, in the one unguarded hour. A person finally, foolishly, let themselves believe was safe. She finishes breaking down the memory the way she once finished, breaking down the pistol cleanly, completely, setting it back where it belongs, before it can spill any further into the morning than it already has. Inside, a small voice cuts through the quiet. Mama Jonah, 6 years old, and already the only reason she gets out of bed some mornings before the sun does. Out here, she calls back. Steady, warm, the voice she keeps just for him, the one that doesn't belong to anyone else in this story. He comes stumbling out in his nightshirt, hair a wild nest, eyes still half shut, one bare foot already stepping wrong onto the frosted porch board, and she catches him before he trips over the step, because that's what mothers do. Catch. Before the falling even finishes happening, before the body has even fully committed to the fall. Cold, he mutters, burying his face into her side. It's autumn, baby. Cold comes with the season. Don't like the season. Neither did your father. A small smile, unbidden, catching her off guard, the way these small resurrections of him always do. Complained about it every year, every single year. Like the weather owed him something personal. Jonah looks up. What'd he say? He said the cold makes a man honest. She tucks a strand of hair behind his ear, the same gesture she's made 1,000 times, the same gesture that will someday, she knows, embarrass him terribly. Said Somerset lets you lie to yourself. Cold doesn't. Cold tells you exactly what you are, tired or strong or somewhere in between. The boy considers this with the seriousness only children manage before the world teaches them not to. Then he nods, like he's filed it away somewhere important, somewhere between the other things. His father left him a pocket knife too big for his hand yet, a way of squinting at the horizon, a stubbornness she recognizes because she married it once, and toddles back inside to find his boots. Addie stays on the porch a moment longer. Because the light is doing that thing. It does, spilling gold over the tree line, catching the frost on the fence posts, turning the whole ordinary world into something almost worth forgiving. And for 1 second, just one, she lets herself believe the lie that this is all there is. A farm, a boy, a well, a rope creaking in the cold, until the wind shifts, and something in her, some old, buried animal part of her, goes still. She doesn't know why. Not yet. There's no reason for it. No sound out of place. No shadow where a chateau shouldn't be. Just a feeling. The kind she used to trust with her whole life. The kind that once told her, 3 seconds before it happened, that a door in a boarding house 2 territories away was about to come off its hinges. The kind she hasn't felt in 2 years and had almost convinced herself was gone for good. She scans the tree line anyway. Old habit. Muscle memory dressed up as caution. Nothing. Just fog. Just frost. Just an ordinary Tuesday, pretending to be nothing at all. She picks up the bucket and goes inside, and if her hand brushes the door frame a little too carefully on the way in, fingers finding the worn groove where a rifle used to hang, checking, out of habit, that it's still there, well, nobody's watching. Nobody ever is. That's the whole point of a quiet life. Nobody watches you close enough to notice the tell, except somebody has been. She just doesn't know it yet. Inside, she puts water on for coffee, cuts bread for Jonah, and moves through the small rituals of the morning with a competence so complete it looks, to anyone who might glance in the window, like nothing at all. Like ordinary. Like ease. It isn't ease. It's discipline wearing an apron. That's the thing nobody in Harlow Creek understands about her, and the thing she has worked very, very hard to make sure they never learn. The discipline doesn't disappear just because you stop needing it for the thing it was built for. It just goes looking for smaller places to live. A well-swept floor, a perfectly latched gate. A child who never once, not once in 6 years, has had to wonder if his mother would be there when he woke. She sits across from Jonah while he eats, watching him with the particular fierce attention of a woman who has learned, the hard way, that safety is never guaranteed, only maintained, watched over, fought for sometimes in ways nobody sees. You're staring, Jonah says, mouthful of bread, entirely unbothered by it. I'm allowed. I'm your mother. Papa used to say that too. Papa was right about most things. She reaches across and steals a crumb off his plate, just to make him laugh, and he does. Bright and unguarded, and the sound of it fills the kitchen the way sunlight fills a room that's been shuttered too long. Outside, the frost is already starting to burn off the fence posts. Another ordinary day, dressed up and waiting to begin. Addie doesn't know yet that it won't stay ordinary. That somewhere beyond the tree line, 3 men are already making plans, unhurried, about a farm they've been told belongs to a woman alone. Alone, and therefore, in their arithmetic, weak. They have made a very old, very common mistake, the same mistake Harlow Creek has been making for 2 years running. They have looked at the fog and assumed it meant nothing was underneath it. Harlow Creek isn't much. A church, a general store, a saloon that pretends to be respectable before noon and stops pretending after. A sheriff's office with a door that sticks in the damp. A handful of houses strung along the road like beads that don't quite match, each one holding some version of a life that got harder than anyone bargained for when they staked their claim out here. But it's enough of a town to have opinions, and Harlow Creek has plenty about the widow Marsh. Addie walks in with Jonah's small hand in hers, a basket of eggs on her hip, and she feels the opinions before she hears them. That's how it works in small towns. Judgment travels ahead of the words that carry it. It arrives in a look before it ever arrives in a sentence. Morning, Mrs. Marsh. That's Halloran from the feed store, tipping his hat with the kind of gentleness reserved for things people think are breakable. Morning, she says. Polite? Flat? Practiced? Still managing out there? All alone? Not alone. Never alone. There's a 6-year-old holding my hand right now, Mr. Halloran, and there's a rifle in the barn and a Colt under the floorboard, and a version of me you have never met and hope to God you never do. She says, none of that. We manage fine, is what comes out instead. He nods, like he doesn't believe her. Nobody ever quite believes her. That's the town's favorite theory about the widow Marsh, that she's barely holding on, barely scraping by, one bad season from losing the farm to the bank or to the wolves, or to whichever version of ruin gets whispered about loudest that week. Because a small, sad, struggling widow is a story the town knows how to tell. A woman who once put a bullet through a man's hat brim at 40 yards without so much as blinking is not a story anyone here has the imagination for. At the general store, Mrs. Pruitt leans across the counter, voice dropped to that particular register reserved for gossip, dressed up as concern. You know the Caldwell place sold, don't you? Bank took it right quick once the widow Caldwell couldn't keep up the payments. Moved back east to live with her sister. Just packed up and gone, like 11 years out here. Never happened at all. I heard. Terrible thing. A woman alone out there. No man to help with the heavy work. Mrs. Pruitt's eyes flick. Deliberate. Meaningful. Toward Addie. You want to be careful, dear. This land doesn't forgive weakness. Addie holds the woman's gaze a beat longer than is comfortable. Long enough that Mrs. Pruitt's smile flickers, just slightly, like she's touched something she didn't expect to be warm. I'll keep that in mind, Addie says. She won't. She doesn't need to. She has buried more weakness than this town has ever met, and she buried it deliberately, the way you bury a thing you never want dug up. On the way out, they pass the small white church at the end of the road, and Addie's steps slow, unbidden, the way they always do at this particular stretch of fence line, because just beyond it, past the low iron gate, is a plot of ground with Elias's name carved into stone, and some habits of grief are as automatic as the ones from her old life. Her feet simply know the way, whether she's decided to walk it or not. Can we visit Papa? Jonah asks, already tugging toward the gate. Quick visit. We've got the whole day ahead of us. They stand together at the small stone marker, and Addie feels the particular quiet that only exists in a place like this, not silence exactly. Because there's wind in the grass and a bird somewhere in the churchyard elm, but a stillness underneath the sound, the stillness of a story that ended before it was finished. Hi, Papa, Jonah says simply, the way he always does, without embarrassment, without performance. I helped Mama with the fence yesterday. I only dropped 2 nails. Addie's throat tightens, and she doesn't trust her voice enough to add anything of her own. She just rests a hand on her son's shoulder and lets him talk the way she lets him talk every time they come here, because his grief is simpler than hers, and she has never wanted to complicate it. They're nearly out the churchyard gate when a new shadow falls across it, broader, slower, deliberate, in a way that has nothing to do with the sun. Josiah Kettle, owner of the largest spread this side of the county line, and a man who has made no secret, over the past year, of exactly which piece of land he'd like to add to it next. Mrs. Marsh. He touches his hat, but there's nothing gentle in it. It's a formality, the kind men like Kettle perform the way they'd sign a contract necessary, but not felt. Been meaning to catch you. That offer on your east acreage still stands. Fair price. More than fair, considering. Considering what, Mr. Kettle? His eyes flick, just briefly, to Jonah, and something in Addie's chest goes tight and cold at exactly the same moment. Her voice stays perfectly, deliberately calm. Considering a woman alone's got a lot to manage, he says, smooth as poured oil. Fences don't mend themselves. Cattle don't tend themselves. And come a hard winter, a place that sizes more burden than blessing for someone in your position. My position. Widowed. No man to help carry the load. He says it plainly, without cruelty, which is somehow worse than if he'd meant it cruelly, because it means he genuinely believes it. Believes it the way the whole town believes it. A simple, unexamined fact of arithmetic. Woman minus husband equals weakness. I'm not trying to take advantage, Mrs. Marsh. I'm offering a kindness, a way out from under, before the winter makes the decision for you, just like it made the decision for the widow Caldwell. Addie looks at him for a long moment, long enough that Jonah shifts uncertainly against her side, sensing something in the air he doesn't have words for yet. The land isn't for sale, Mr. Kettle. Not today, maybe. Not any day. Something flickers across his face, not anger, not quite, but a kind of patient irritation, the look of a man accustomed to offers eventually being accepted, given enough time and enough hardship to soften the answer. Well, he touches his hat again, already turning away. The offer stands. Land's not going anywhere. Neither, I expect, is winter. He walks off toward the saloon, and Addie stands very still for a moment, watching him go, something old and wary settling into the base of her skull. Because Kettle wants the land. Has wanted it for a year. And a woman who has spent years learning to read intention in the set of a man's shoulders does not love the timing of what happens next. Not one bit. 3 drifters, 3 days after Kettle's latest visit, riding onto her property, asking pointed questions about who lives where and who lives alone. Probably nothing. She tells herself that. She's told herself that before about things that turned out, eventually, to be very much something. Before they reach the wagon, a hand catches her sleeve, gentle, apologetic even before the words arrive. Mrs. Marsh. A moment, if you'd allow it. It's Ruth Bell, who runs the boarding house at the far end of the road, a widow herself, 20 years further into the particular arithmetic of loss than Addie is. Her husband went into the ground the same year Harlow Creek was founded, back when the whole settlement was little more than a trading post and a promise. If anyone in this town has earned the right to speak on the subject of surviving alone, it's her, Mrs. Bell. I won't keep you. Ruth glances once toward Kettle's retreating back, a flicker of something sharp and knowing passing over her weathered face. But I saw that man corner you just now, and I saw the look on your face after, and I wanted you to hear it plain from somebody who's lived it. Don't let him plant that seed in you, the one that says you're one bad season from needing a man's help to keep what's yours. I wasn't planning to. Good. Ruth's grip on her sleeve tightens, just slightly, something fierce and maternal in it, despite the fact that Addie is nearly a stranger to her, in the way most of Harlow Creek remain strangers to each other even after years of shared Sundays. 20 years I've kept that boarding house running, alone, and every single year some man in this town has looked at me like I was a problem waiting to be solved by his generosity. You remind me some myself, Mrs. Marsh. That quiet way you have of not arguing with folks who underestimate you. Just letting them go on thinking whatever lets them sleep easiest. A small, knowing smile. It's a useful thing, being underestimated. Longer it lasts, the more room it gives a woman to do what she actually needs to do. Addie studies the older woman a long moment, something in the words landing far more precisely than Ruth Bell could possibly know. That's a generous way of looking at it. It's the only way I've found that doesn't leave a person bitter. Ruth studies her a moment, something searching in the look, the particular attention of a woman who has spent 2 decades learning to read the difference between a person who is merely tired and a person who is carrying something heavier than tired. You've got a steadiness to you, Mrs. Marsh. I noticed it the first year you came to town, still raw with grief, and I've noticed it every year since. Most folks who lose what you lost, it hollows them out for a good long while. You never hollowed. You just went quiet. Addie says nothing to that. There isn't a safe answer, and Ruth Bell, to her credit, doesn't seem to expect one. I don't ask what a person's quiet is hiding, Ruth continues, releasing her sleeve, straightening, glancing down at Jonah with a warmth that softens every line of her face at once. Learned that the hard way too, running a boarding house all these years. Everybody who comes through that door is carrying something they'd rather not say out loud. My business is beds and breakfast, not confession. A small, knowing smile aimed now squarely at Addie. But if that quiet of yours ever needs somewhere safe to be loud instead, my door's open. No questions asked. That's a promise, not a courtesy. I'll remember that, Addie says, and means it more than Ruth could possibly know. You take care out there, the both of you. And if that man comes sniffing around your fence line again, you send word. I've got a shotgun and considerably less patience than you do for men who think a widow's grief makes her stupid as well as sad. She's gone before Addie can properly thank her, off toward the boarding house with the brisk, unhurried gait of a woman who has long since stopped waiting for anyone's permission to keep moving forward. And Addie watches her go with something that feels, unexpectedly, like the first real kinship she's allowed herself to feel toward anyone in this town since Elias died. At the wagon, Otis Reed is waiting, hat pushed back, grinning like he's got nowhere better to be, which he doesn't, because he works Addie's land 3 days a week and spends the other 4 wishing he worked it 7. Mrs. Marsh, a nod respectful. Jonah, a wider grin, less respectful, more like an older brother might give. Y'all heading back out? We are. Mind if I ride along? Got nothing better to do till the Hendersons need me Thursday. She studies him a moment. 19. Earnest. Loyal in the uncomplicated way. Only the young manage before life teaches them. Loyalty has a price. He reminds her sometimes of who she used to be. Before the training, before the name, before she learned that trust is a door you have to check the hinges on every single time, no matter how many times it's opened smoothly before. Suit yourself, she says. He beams like she's handed him something precious, and maybe, in the small currency of Harlow Creek, she has. The ride home is quiet at first. Jonah dozes against her side. The eggs rattle gently in their basket, and Otis talks about nothing in particular, the Hendersons' new bull, a card game he lost at the saloon, a rumor about drifters passing through 2 towns over. Drifters, Addie says, careful to keep her voice light. What kind? Dunno. Just drifters. Fella at the store said 3 men came through Widmark asking odd questions. Where the smaller farms sat. Who lived alone? Otis shrugs, unbothered, the way you shrug at weather. That isn't your weather yet. Probably nothing. Probably nothing. Addie says it back to him. Easy. Agreeable. But something in her chest has gone quiet and still and watchful, the way it did on the porch that morning, and this time she doesn't try to talk herself out of it. Because 2 facts have arrived in the same week, and she has never once, in her whole life, believed in coincidence quite that convenient. Josiah Kettle, hungry for her land, and 3 strangers, asking exactly the kind of question a man might ask if he wanted to know how much resistance a particular piece of land was likely to offer before he made his next move. She doesn't say any of that to Otis, doesn't say it to anyone. That's the whole discipline of the life she's built. You carry the weight yourself, quietly, and you let the world keep believing you're carrying nothing at all. That night, after Joan is asleep, after Otis has ridden home whistling something off-key, Addie sits at the kitchen table with a lamp burning low and a stack of unpaid bills she isn't reading. Because her mind isn't on the bills, it's on the drifters. 3 men, asking who lived alone. And underneath that, quieter, colder, Kettle's voice, smooth as poured oil, offering a kindness that felt, the longer she sat with it, less and less like kindness at all, which could mean anything, which could mean nothing at all. Drifters ask questions the way rivers carve canyons, slow, aimless, following whatever's easiest. It doesn't have to mean her, except a small, cold voice at the back of her skull, a voice she hasn't heard clearly in 2 years, a voice that used to belong to a woman who wore a different name, says, it's never nothing. Not really. Nothing is just a story you tell yourself until the something arrives. She shakes her head, like she can physically dislodge the thought. And that's when it happens. The flash. It isn't a memory. Not exactly. It's faster than that. Sharper, gone before she can even properly see it, just an impression, an after-image burned into the backs of her eyes. A hallway. Dim light. The particular gray of gun smoke hanging in still air. A man's voice, low urgent, D-die. Cover the east door, and then it's gone. Snapped shut like a book, slammed closed by a hand that isn't hers. Addie sits very still, both palms flat on the table. Breathing counted out, 1, 2, 3, the way she used to breathe before a door came down, before a room went loud, before her whole body became a single narrow point of purpose. She hasn't had a flash like that in months. They used to come every night, back when the grief was new, back before she learned to build the walls high enough to keep the old life out. Now they only come when something is wrong. When some part of her, some old trained animal instinct, senses a thread pulled loose somewhere out there in the dark. She doesn't know what the thread is yet, but she knows, with a certainty that has never once been wrong, that it's been pulled. She rises, crosses to the window, checks the latch, checks it again, though it was already locked the first time, because checking twice was never about the latch, it was about the ritual, the small physical act of control in a world that so rarely offers any. Outside, the yard is empty. The barn, a dark shape against a darker sky. The tree line beyond it, silent, unmoving, ordinary, and still. Still. Because the flash doesn't come from nowhere. It comes when the body knows something the mind hasn't caught up to yet. It comes as a warning dressed up as a memory, and she has learned the hard way, more than once, that ignoring it is the single most dangerous thing a person in her old line of work could ever do. She doesn't sleep in the bed that night. She sits in the chair by the window instead, a shawl around her shoulders. The Colt her father left her, the old one, the one from before, the one she keeps close, but never speaks of resting in her lap like it belongs there. Because it does. It always did. She just spent 2 years trying to convince herself otherwise. Sleep, when it finally takes her that night, doesn't take her gently. It takes her backward. She's 17 again, standing in a cold stone hallway that smells of lamp oil and gun grease, and a man is watching her from a doorway with the particular expression of someone appraising livestock at auction. Silas Vane. Not old, not then, though even then, there was something ancient in the way he watched people, some patience that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the particular kind of man he was. He built things. That was how he described himself once, in a rare unguarded moment. I build things out of raw material other people throw away. She was raw material. An orphaned girl, with a dead lawman for a father and a set of hands too steady for the life the rest of the world had planned for her kitchens, needlework, some rancher's modest homestead if she was fortunate, some rancher's modest grave if she wasn't. Vane had looked at those hands the first time they met, turned them over in his own like he was reading a letter, and said the words that changed the entire shape of her life. You've been wasting these. She hadn't understood, not then what she was agreeing to when she nodded. The training came first, nearly a year of it, in a compound outside a town whose name she has trained herself, deliberately, not to think about anymore. Vane didn't just teach her to shoot, she could already shoot. Better than most men, twice her size. Her father had seen to that in the years before consumption took him. What Vane taught her was stillness. The kind of stillness that lets a person become invisible in a crowded room. The kind that lets a body wait, motionless, for 4 hours in freezing rain, without a single muscle, betraying the discomfort. A gun is easy, he told her once, in that low, unhurried voice of his. Anyone can pull a trigger. What I need from you is patience. The bullet is the last thing that happens. Everything that matters happens before it. She believed him. She still believes him, some nights, whether she wants to or not. He taught her other things too. In that first long year, things that had nothing to do with weapons at all, and everything to do with the particular art of disappearing inside a life that wasn't your own. How to hold a lie steady in your face, long enough that even a trained eye couldn't find the seam. How to read a room the way other people read a letter, taking in every detail in the time it took most men to notice the furniture. How to make yourself small and unremarkable when smallness served the job, and how to fill an entire doorway with pure, unmistakable authority when authority served it instead. Everything is a tool, he told her once, gesturing at the whole of her face, her hands, her voice, the particular way she could go still as carved stone when stillness was called for. Your gift isn't the gun, Addie. The gun is the smallest part of it. Your gift is that you can become whatever a room needs you to become, and nobody watching ever sees the seam. She hadn't understood then how much of a warning that was disguised as a compliment. Hadn't understood that a man who valued her precisely because she could become anything would never quite trust her to simply be one thing, permanently, on her own terms. It took years and a farmhouse and a husband and a boy who called her Mama, in a voice that never once doubted she'd be there to understand that the truest gift she carried wasn't the ability to become whatever a room needed. It was the choice, finally exercised, to decide for herself what she wanted to become instead. The name came soon after, on her very first real job, a rescue, not a killing. Though the line between the two blurred so often in that work, it barely felt worth drawing at all. A banker's daughter taken for ransom outside Cheyenne, 3 kidnappers, a farmhouse not unlike her own now. Strange how the geometry of her life keeps circling back to farmhouses. She'd gone in through a cellar window. Nobody thought a girl not yet 18 could fit through, and she'd come out an hour later with the girl alive, and all 3 kidnappers accounted for. And the man debriefing her afterward, some senior operative whose name she's long since let go of, had looked at his notes and said, almost admiringly, "Girl doesn't miss. Not once. Did I, that one." It was meant as an insult, or close to one. A joke about a girl doing a man's work too well for anyone's comfort. Vane heard it and adopted it instead. Turned the insult into a brand. Within a year, it was the only name half the Bureau's clients knew her by. 4 years of it, in the end. 4 years of hallways and canyons and rooms that went suddenly violently loud. 4 years of learning exactly how far a person could be pushed before the line between justice and something colder stopped, meaning anything at all. She was good at it. That was the terrible private truth she has never spoken aloud to a living soul, not even Elias. She was good at it, the way some people are good at music, or numbers, or faith. It came to her the way breathing comes to most people without effort, without doubt, a talent that felt, in its cleanest moments, almost like grace. There's a memory from her second year that arrives now, too. The way two old wounds sometimes ache together even when only one of them gets touched. She doesn't invite this one. It comes anyway, the way the worst memories always do uninvited. Unwelcome, patient as the debt collector who knows exactly where you live. A ranch outside a town she won't name, even to herself, even in sleep. Barely 18. A job that was supposed to be simple. Recover a girl held for ransom by a man named Corbett, a small-time outlaw with a big reputation for cruelty and a smaller one, thankfully, for competence. Except the job wasn't simple. Jobs rarely were. In the end, no matter how simple they looked on paper in Vane's office, his pen tapping out the details in that unhurried, patient hand of his. Corbett had two men with him, not one, and the girl 9 years old, small enough that Addie's chest still tightens at the memory of exactly how small was not being held in the barn, where the intelligence said she'd be. She was in the house, which meant the plan, built carefully around the barn, around a clean approach and a clean extraction, had to be abandoned in the space of about 4 seconds. Standing in the tree line at 2 in the morning, with rain coming down cold and steady, and a second operative, a young man named Hale, barely older than she was, new to the bureau, eager in the particular way that gets people killed, asking her, in a whisper, what they were supposed to do now. She remembers the decision more clearly than almost anything else from those years. Remembers it because of how little time it took to make, and how much time she has since spent, quietly, in kitchens and barns and church pews, wondering whether it was the right one. Split up. Hale takes the barn, confirms it's empty, falls back to the tree line. She goes for the house alone. He hadn't wanted to leave her alone with it. She remembers that too, the particular stubborn set of his young jaw, so like Otis's now, so like every earnest, untested young man who has ever looked at her and seen someone worth protecting instead of someone who does the protecting. She told him flatly. That arguing wasn't part of the plan, and he'd gone, because in the Bureau's strange, brutal hierarchy, her word already outranked his hesitation. What happened inside that house isn't something she lets herself remember in full, even now, even in sleep. Fragments only. A door that wouldn't hold. A man's voice, slurred with drink, more dangerous for it, not less. The girl's face, white and still, in a corner of a room lit only by a single guttering lamp. Corbett's hand, closing around the girl's arm, and the particular, terrible calculation that followed the calculation. Vane had spent a year training into her, the one that let her separate the shot she needed to take from every human instinct, screaming that a shot in a room this small, this dark, this crowded with a frightened child, was a shot that could go wrong in 100 different ways. It didn't go wrong. That's the mercy of the memory, if it can be called that. Her aim was true. It always was. Corbett went down before his second man even understood what was happening, and by the time understanding arrived for him, it was already too late to matter. The girl was crying by the time Addie reached her, not from fear of Corbett anymore, but from something worse, the particular terror of a child who has just watched violence happen in a room too small to look away from it. Addie remembers scooping her up, remembers the girl's arms locking around her neck with a strength that seemed impossible for someone so small, remembers carrying her out into the rain toward the tree line where Hale was waiting, rifle shaking slightly in his young hands, face gone the color of old ash. You did that, he'd said. Not quite a question, once they were clear. Both of them. Alone. I did what the job required. That's not what I asked. She hadn't answered him. There wasn't an answer that would have satisfied either of them, not the honest one, which was that some part of her, the trained part, the built part, had felt nothing at all in the moment itself, only afterward, only now, only in memories like this one that arrive uninvited at 3 in the morning in a farmhouse, a lifetime away. The girl was returned to her family. The Bureau was paid. Vane, reviewing the report afterward, had said only 4 words to her, delivered with the same flat, appraising calm, he said everything with. Clean work. As expected. As expected. as if precision were the only currency that mattered. It was in her 3rd year, on a job that took her far from the Bureau's usual territory, that she met a farmer named Elias Marsh. He wasn't part of the case. He was just a witness, a man who happened to be loading grain at a rail depot when a gunfight spilled out of a saloon and across the street toward him, and Addie then, only Didi. The other name, having gone quiet somewhere in the years before, had put herself between him and 3 bullets, without a single second of hesitation. He'd looked at her afterward with an expression she had never once, in 3 years of dangerous work, seen on anyone's face before. Not fear. Not admiration, exactly, though there was some of that too. Something closer to recognition. Like he was looking at a person, not a weapon. Like the thing she'd just done with a gun in her hand was, to him, simply an extension of the same steady hands that might someday hold a rope, or a hammer, or a child. You didn't have to do that, he'd said. I know. Why did you? And she hadn't had an answer for him. Not then. It took her another year to understand that the answer was the same reason she's sitting in a farmhouse kitchen chair tonight, with a Colt in her lap, because somewhere beneath years of training, beneath the name and the reputation and the cold, clean grace of a well-placed shot, there was still a person underneath who wanted, more than anything, to matter to someone the way a person matters, not the way a weapon matters. Elias gave her that, gave her the permission to become someone else entirely. There is one more memory, the darkest one, the one she keeps furthest from the surface. It belongs to her 4th year, the last months before she left, and it is the one memory she has never, not once, allowed herself to examine fully in daylight. A senator's aide, dead in a hotel room, 2 states from where she'd been sent on an entirely different assignment. Officially, a robbery gone wrong. Unofficially, and this is the part she buried deepest, the part she has never once spoken aloud, not even to Elias unofficially, she had been in that same hotel that same night, and had seen, through a half-open door at the end of a long corridor, exactly who walked out of that room 40 minutes before the body was discovered. Vane himself. She never asked him about it. Some part of her, even then, understood that asking would mean choosing a side. She wasn't certain she was prepared to choose, and so she'd simply filed it away, the way she filed away every uncomfortable detail of that life, and let it go quiet, the way everything eventually went quiet, given enough time. But quiet isn't the same as gone. The last conversation she ever had with Silas Vane, the day she told him she was leaving, plays now in her sleep with the particular sharpness memory reserves for its most important moments. They stood in that same cold stone hallway where it all began. Vane's face, unreadable as ever, though something moved behind his eyes that she had never quite been able to name. You understand there's no clean way out of this life, he'd said. Not for someone with your particular skills. Not for someone the wrong people already know by name. I understand. Then you also understand that I can't guarantee your safety once you're gone. The Bureau protects its own. Once you leave, you're not one of ours anymore. I'm not asking you to guarantee anything, Silas. I'm asking you to let me go. A long silence. Long enough that she thought, for one terrible moment, that he might refuse outright that years of ownership, however he'd have phrased it, might not release her so easily. Instead, he'd simply nodded. Once. Go then, he said. But Addie, whatever name you choose to live under from here, don't ever fool yourself into thinking the name Didi dies, just because you stop using it. Names like that don't die. They just wait. She wakes with a jolt, the chair creaking under her, the shawl slipping from one shoulder, the Colt still resting heavy and familiar in her lap. Outside, the sky has gone the pale gray of very early morning, the fog thick against the window glass. And in her chest, that old voice, Vane's voice, calm and patient and utterly certain, is still speaking. Years later, in a farmhouse he has never once set foot in. They just wait. She sits with that a long moment, watching the fog press against the glass, and for the first time in 2 years she lets herself wonder, seriously, whether the man who built her out of raw material has ever, in all this time, stopped looking for the pieces he considers still his. 3 days pass. Nothing happens. The drifters don't materialize. The flash doesn't return. The town keeps whispering its same tired pity, and Addie keeps letting it, because a woman who corrects every wrong assumption about herself is a woman who invites people to look closer, and looking closer is the one thing she cannot afford. By the 4th evening, she's almost convinced herself it was nothing. Almost. Which is, of course, exactly when the world decides to prove her wrong. Sundown. The light going that particular burnt orange color that makes even a tired old farmhouse look like something out of a painting. Addie is in the yard, sleeves rolled, mending a section of fence that the last frost cracked clean through. Jonah sits nearby on an overturned bucket, helping by handing her nails one at a time with the gravity of a surgeon's assistant. "This one," he says, holding up a nail like it's a rare jewel. "Thank you." She takes it, drives it home with 2 clean strikes of the hammer. No wasted motion. Never any wasted motion, not even in something as small as mending a fence, because her whole body learned a long time ago that economy of movement is the difference between finishing a job and not finishing at all. "Papa used to let me hold the nails too," Jonah says, quieter now, the way he gets sometimes when Elias slips unbidden into the conversation. Addie's hammer pauses. "Just for a second." "He did," she says. "You were his favorite helper. Was I better than you?" A laugh escapes her, surprised out of her chest. "Much better. I was terrible at handing him nails. Kept dropping them." Jonah grins, delighted at the idea of his mother being bad at something, anything. And for a moment the evening is soft and gold and simple, and Addie lets herself have it. Lets herself believe, one more time, in the lie of the ordinary. She works the next section of fence in a comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after years of 2 people learning each other's rhythms, except one of them is 6 and doesn't know yet that he's learned anything at all. "Mama. Do you miss Papa?" She doesn't stop hammering. Doesn't let the question land visibly, because Jonah asks this sometimes, in the offhand way children ask enormous things, and she has learned that the wrong reaction teaches a child to stop asking, and she never, ever wants him to stop asking. "Every day," she says. "Some days more than others. Today's a middle kind of day." What's a middle kind of day? Not the worst. Not the easiest. Just middle. She sets another nail, drives it home. "You'll understand better when you're older. Missing someone isn't one feeling, baby. It's a whole weather system. Some days it storms. Some days it's just gray. And some days, if you're lucky, the sun gets through anyway." Jonah considers this with his father's exact squint and hands her the next nail without another word, satisfied. Apparently, with an answer he'll spend years growing into. That's when the dogs start barking. Not the excited bark of a rabbit in the field. Not the bored bark of nothing much at all. A different bark. Low. Sustained. The bark that means something is wrong before the something has even shown itself. Addie is on her feet before she consciously decides to stand. Jonah, inside. But, now, something in her voice flat, hard, a register he has never once heard from her, sends him scrambling for the porch without another word. Addie's eyes sweep the tree line. The same tree line that was empty 3 nights ago. The same fading light, the same ordinary dusk. Except now there are 3 shapes moving through it. Unhurried. Deliberate. Riders. Her pulse doesn't spike. That's the strange thing. The thing that would surprise anyone who only knew her as the Widow Marsh. Gentle and struggling and alone. Her pulse doesn't spike at all. It slows. Steadies. Drops into a rhythm she hasn't needed in 2 years but has never, not once, forgotten how to find. Because underneath the calico dress and the flour-dusted apron and the soft mother's voice she keeps for her son, there is a woman who was trained, deliberately, patiently, over 4 hard years, to become perfectly still in the exact moment when everyone else would be panicking. Didai doesn't panic. Didai calculates. She walks, doesn't run. Walking draws less attention than running. Another old lesson toward the porch, scooping up the hammer from the fence rail as she goes. Because a hammer in a farmwife's hand looks like nothing at all, and looking like nothing is a weapon in its own right. Behind her, the riders emerge from the tree line into the open field. 3 men, faces covered kerchiefs pulled up over nose and mouth, hats low. Horses moving at an easy trot, the unhurried confidence of men who have done this before and expect to do it again without consequence. Addie's mind, cold and clear now, runs through what she's looking at the way she was trained to. 3 riders. 2 carry rifles across their saddles, slung loose, not yet raised amateur or overconfident, hard to say which yet. The 3rd rides slightly ahead, hand resting near his hip. That one's the leader. That one's the one to watch first. She reaches the porch steps. "Jonah," she says, low, calm, not turning around. Stay behind the door. Whatever you hear, whatever it sounds like, you stay behind that door until I come get you. You understand me? A small, frightened voice from inside. Yes, Mom. Good boy. And then Addie Marsh, widow, farmer, gentle voice, soft eyes. The woman this whole town has decided is one bad season from ruin turns to face the three riders crossing her field at dusk, and something in her shoulders settles into a stance the town has never once seen her hold, because the fog was never really about the weather. It was about her. The lead rider reins up first, 20 feet out, close enough that Addie can see the kerchief move with his breathing, the particular unhurried arrogance in the sets of his shoulders. A man who has done this before. A man who expects fear, because fear is the currency this kind of man usually gets paid in. Evening, ma'am, he says. Voice muffled by the cloth, but not unfriendly. That's worse, somehow. The friendliness. Didn't mean to startle you. You've startled my boy. Addie's voice is even. Steady. The hammer hangs loose at her side, low, unthreatening. State your business and be on your way. A low chuckle from one of the other two. She's got some spine on her. Quiet, the lead rider says, and something in his tone shifts, just slightly, the friendliness thinning at the edges. We're not here to trouble you long, ma'am. Just need what's in the house. Silver, cash money, whatever you got put by. There's nothing put by. This is a farm, not a bank. Every farm's got something. He dismounts, slow, easy, the confidence of a man who has never once had things go badly for him. Won't take but a minute. You cooperate. Nobody gets hurt. Simple as that. Behind Addie, through the thin wood of the door, she can hear Jonah's breathing. Fast, frightened, trying so hard to be quiet. Because that sound, her son's fear, close enough to touch, close enough that she could reach back and put a hand on the door and feel it trembling under his small palms, does something. To the last remaining hesitation left in her chest, it burns it away completely. Not into rage. That's the thing nobody would expect, watching her in this exact moment. Not rage. Something colder than rage. Something with edges. Somewhere far beneath the surface of her thinking, a version of herself she buried 2 years ago opens one eye and says calmly, without malice, finally, "Get back on your horse," she says. Quiet now. Quieter than before. And somehow that quiet carries further than the shout would have. Last chance. The lead rider laughs. Actually laughs. Head tipping back slightly, like she's told a joke at a supper table. Last chance, he repeats, delighted. Boys, you hear that? Lady's giving us a last chance. The second rider swings down, too, rifle coming up off his shoulder now. Casual, careless, the barrel drifting, somewhere in the general direction of the porch. Cute, he says. Real cute. And the third, the one still mounted, the quiet one, the one who hasn't said a word yet, shifts his horse a few steps closer to the house. Positioning, Addie notes, with the particular instinct of someone trying to see around a corner. He shouldn't need to see around. 3 targets. 2 dismounted. 1 still on horseback. 2 rifles. 1 holstered pistol on the leader. She can see the shape of beneath his coat. 20 feet, closing to 15. Wind negligible. Light fading but not gone. Her body catalogs all of it in under 2 seconds, the way it always did, the way it was built to, back before the farm, back before Elias, back before she buried this particular version of herself under 2 years of soft mornings and gentle lies. Because that's the thing about training like hers. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't fade. It just waits, patient as bedrock, for the exact moment it's needed again. The lead rider takes another step toward the porch, now. Real slow. You're gonna... He doesn't finish the sentence, because Addie moves. Not fast in the way people expect fast to look. No wild flailing, no desperate lunge. Fast in the way that trained stillness becomes motion. The kind of fast that doesn't look like anything at all. Right up until it's already finished happening. 1 clean, economical step to the side, out of the direct line the second man's rifle had begun drifting toward. The hammer leaves her hand in the same motion, thrown low and hard, and it catches the lead rider across the wrist just as his hand closes on his holstered pistol. He yells. The pistol drops. And in the half-second of chaos that follows the half-second every untrained man wastes on shock, on disbelief, on the simple animal confusion of a plan going instantly, irreversibly wrong, Addie is already moving again. She's inside the doorframe before the second rider can bring his rifle fully up. And when she comes back out, she's not empty-handed anymore. The Winchester, the one that hangs always just inside that door, in the exact spot her hand found by instinct on a foggy morning 3 days ago. The one nobody in Harlow Creek has ever asked about, because why would a widow need a rifle within arm's reach of her front door? Now they'd know why. Everything after this happens in fragments. Because that's how it happened, in her memory. Later, not as a smooth, continuous scene, but as a series of sharp, disconnected instants, strung together by a body that already knew exactly what to do and didn't need her conscious mind to slow down and watch. Her mind, underneath the calm, is not calm at all. It is a different kind of loud. Fragments of thought arriving faster than she can properly order them, each one cut short before it finishes, because there isn't time. There is never time. That was always the first thing Vane taught her. Thinking takes time you don't have. Trained hands don't wait for permission. Jonah's behind that door, which means the door is the line. Nothing crosses the line, except the second man's rifle is already rising. Until it isn't. Until her hand has already decided what to do about that. 3/4 of a second, before her mind catches up to agreeing with it. So, move the rifle level. Cheek to stock. Breath held, released halfway. The old rhythm returning like it had never left. The second rider's face visible for just a fraction of a second above the kerchief. Eyes going wide. Understanding arriving 1/2 beat too late as the shot takes the rifle clean out of his hands before he can fire it. Not his body. His weapon. A message, deliberate, precise. She doesn't need to kill him. She just needs him to stop, he screams. Drops to his knees, cradling fingers that are numb but not broken. Because she placed that shot with a precision that had nothing to do with luck and everything to do with years of training. She never once let herself forget. Not really. Not even under 2 years of flower and fence posts and lullabies. The lead rider is scrambling for his fallen pistol, wrist already swelling from the hammer strike, and Addie's second shot puts a bullet into the dirt 8 inches from his reaching hand. Don't, she says. One word. That's all it takes. He freezes, hand hovering, because something in that single syllable has told him with absolute certainty that the next shot won't miss. The third man, the quiet one, still mounted, makes his move then, the only one of the three with the presence of mind to try. He wheels his horse, rifle coming up fast, and for a moment the whole scene narrows down to that single axis, his barrel rising, her body already turning, the Winchester already tracking, faster than a man on a spooked horse has any right to expect from a farm widow in a flour-dusted apron. The shot that follows doesn't hit the man. It hits the ground directly beneath his horse's front hooves, close enough that the animal rears, screaming, throwing its rider hard into the dirt with a sound that knocks the air clean out of his chest. Silence. Real silence. The kind that comes after violence, thick and ringing, broken only by the whimper of the man clutching his numb hand and the ragged gasping of the one who just hit the ground. And underneath the silence, quieter still, a single thought, arriving late, arriving the way thoughts always arrive once the body has already finished doing the thing the mind was too slow to stop or start, because she hadn't decided to do any of that. Not really. Not the way a person decides to bake bread, or mend a fence, or tuck a boy into bed. It simply happened. The way breathing happens, the way a heartbeat happens, and that more than the danger, more than the fear, for Jonah still hidden behind the door, is the part that frightens her most, standing here in the last gray light of an ordinary autumn evening, because 2 years wasn't long enough to unlearn it, which means, maybe, 2 years was never going to be long enough, which means some part of this was always going to come back, given the right kind of knock at the door. She sets that thought aside. There isn't time for it either. Not yet. Addie stands on her own porch steps. Rifle still level, breathing controlled, unhurried, and for the first time in 2 years her face wears an expression the town of Harlow Creek has never once seen on the Widow Marsh. Not fear, not panic, not the soft, sad resignation. Everyone assumes lives behind her eyes. Something colder, something older. On your knees, she says, to all three. Hands where I can see them. And somebody better start explaining why 3 men rode onto my land at dusk to rob a widow with a 6-year-old boy inside. The lead rider, cradling his wrist, looks up at her with an expression that has shifted from arrogance to something closer to genuine confusion. "Who are you?" he says, and it isn't really a question. Not anymore. It's closer to disbelief spoken out loud. "Nobody," Addie says. "I'm nobody at all." Which is, of course, exactly what she's spent 2 years trying to become, and exactly what she just, in under 30 seconds, proved she is not. The man on the ground, the one thrown from his horse, is the one who finally breaks the silence, and when he does, his voice comes out wrong, thin, shaking, not with pain, though there's plenty of that in it too, but with something closer to superstition. "Did," he says. Just that. One word, and it lands in the yard like a second gunshot. Addie's rifle doesn't waver. Not outwardly. But something behind her eyes goes very, very still. "What did you say?" The man scrambles backward on his elbows, putting distance between himself and the woman standing over him with a Winchester, and an expression that has gone from cold to something closer to lethal. I seen you. Years back. Job outside Cheyenne. You took down 3 men outside a stage station, put a bullet through a hat brim, at 40 yards without so much as blinking." His voice cracks. "I thought you was dead. Everybody said you was dead." The lead rider, still on his knees, still cradling his ruined wrist, looks between his companion and Addie with dawning, horrified comprehension. "You're joking," he mutters. "Tell me you're joking." "I ain't joking. That's her. That's Vane's shooter. I'd know that draw anywhere. Nobody moves like that. Nobody." The name lands somewhere deep in Addie's chest, somewhere she thought she'd buried under 2 years of soil and silence and small ordinary mornings, and for one disorienting instant, the yard around her seems to tilt, seems to blur at the edges, the present and the past colliding in a way that makes her stomach drop. Because that name was supposed to be dead. She let it die. Deliberately. Buried it the same season she married Elias, the same season she chose a farmhouse and a well and a rope creaking against stone over a life of hallways and gunsmoke, and men who called her by a title instead of a name. Nobody in Harlow Creek has ever heard that word. Nobody was supposed to. "You're mistaken," Addie says, and her voice, to her own surprise, comes out level, controlled, the old training reasserting itself even now, even here, even with her whole carefully built world cracking open at the edges. "I'm a widow with a farm. Nothing more." But the man on the ground is shaking his head, wild-eyed, and something in his terror is more convincing than any denial she could offer. No, I know what I seen. That draw, that precision. Ain't nobody taught that but Silas Vane. And Vane only ever trained one shooter that good. And she went by, "Enough," Addie says. The word cracks across the yard like a whip. And this time, it isn't controlled. This time there's something underneath it, something raw, something that has nothing to do with the calm, patient farm woman Harlow Creek thinks it knows. The man goes silent. All 3 of them do. Because in that half second, something has shifted in the yard. The balance of fear has completed its full reversal. These were men who rode in expecting an easy mark, a lonely widow, an unguarded farm. A woman the whole town has already decided is soft and struggling and alone. What they found instead was something none of them have language for yet, though one of them, at least, has found the shape of an old name to hang it on. Addie lowers the rifle, just slightly, not out of mercy, out of calculation, because a rifle held too long on a man who's already broken becomes a different kind of threat than the situation now calls for. "Who sent you?" she says. Silence. "I asked you a question." The lead rider swallows hard, wrist forgotten for the moment, eyes fixed on her with something closer to religious dread than ordinary fear. "Nobody sent us. We're just... Don't lie to me." Her voice drops lower, and somehow that makes it worse. 3 men don't ride onto a widow's land, asking specifically what she's got put by unless somebody told them there was something worth finding. So I'll ask you one more time, and I'd think carefully before you answer wrong twice in one evening. Who sent you? The man's mouth opens, closes, opens again. Because there's a name sitting behind his teeth, she can see it, the way you can sometimes see a confession arriving in a man's eyes a full second before it reaches his mouth. And whatever that name is, it isn't Kettles. She can see that too, in the particular shape of his fear. This isn't a man afraid of losing a land deal. This is a man afraid of something with much longer reach. And that's when, from somewhere down the road, the sound of hooves reaches them fast, urgent. More than one horse and a voice calls out through the dusk, sharp with alarm. Mrs. Marsh, Addie, Otis, riding hard. Having heard the shots from wherever he was on the road home, rifle already drawn, face pale, with a fear that has nothing to do with what actually happened and everything to do with what he's afraid he'll find. He reins up hard at the edge of the yard, and the sight that greets him stops him cold. 3 grown men on their knees in the dirt, a widow standing over them with a rifle held like she's held one her whole life, a calm in her face that doesn't match anything he's ever seen there before. Addie, he breathes. What in God's name? Get the sheriff, Otis. Her voice is steady again now, back under careful control, the door on that other name, that other woman closing as fast as it opened. Tell him I've got 3 men here who owe him some answers. Otis stares at her a moment longer, taking in the scene, the rifle, the fallen men, the strange new stillness in her posture, and something in his young face shifts too, not fear exactly, but the particular disorientation of watching a picture you thought you understood rearrange itself into something you don't recognize at all. Yes, ma'am, he says finally, and wheels his horse back toward town. Addie watches him go, and when she turns back to the 3 men kneeling in her yard, her eyes find the one who spoke the name first, the frightened one, the one still shaking, and something passes between them, an understanding, a warning silent and absolute. That name, she says quietly, just for him, never happened tonight. You understand me? He nods fast, desperate. Yes, ma'am. Never happened. But it did happen. And Addie Marsh standing in her own yard at dusk, rifle in hand, the last light dying gold and orange over the tree-line knows, with a certainty that settles cold and heavy in her chest, that a name spoken once is a name that can be spoken again. And somewhere out there, beyond Harlow Creek, someone is going to hear it. Because that's the nature of names like hers. They don't stay contained. They travel from a frightened man's mouth to a sheriff's careful ear, to a stranger's report scribbled by lamplight in some office she'll never see. And every mile that name travels is a mile closer to the person who gave it to her in the first place. She has always known that, on some level, even in the years she spent trying very hard not to know it. Names like Diadai are debts too. They come due eventually, whether you spend them or not. By the time Sheriff Caleb Whitfield arrives with Otis at his side, the light has gone from gold to gray to nearly gone entirely, the sky bruising purple over the tree line, and the 3 men are trussed with rope, Addie fetched from the barn without a word tied fast, efficient, the kind of knots a rancher might know, or might not, depending on who taught them and why. Whitfield swings down from his horse, taking in the scene with the particular squint of a lawman who has just ridden into a story that doesn't match the one he expected on the way over. Otis said you had trouble, he says, slow, careful, eyes moving between the widow, the rifle, and the 3 subdued men in her yard. Had some. Handled it, Whitfield repeats, and there's something almost admiring in the way he says it, underneath the confusion. Mrs. Marsh, these men were armed, I noticed. He looks at her a long moment. She holds his gaze, calm, unblinking, the same steady patience she's shown him at church socials and county meetings for 2 years running. Except now there's something else behind it too. Something he can't quite name. Something that makes him look at her the way you'd look at a locked door you'd always assumed was just a wall. Well, he says finally, clearing his throat, reaching for the practical business of tying prisoners to saddles, because it's easier than reaching for the question actually sitting in his chest. I'll want a full account. Tomorrow, maybe, once you've had a chance to settle. Tonight you ought to just rest. I'll come by in the morning. He nods and busies himself loading the 3 men onto their horses, and if he notices that not one of them will meet Addie's eyes as they're led away, not even the surly lead rider, wrist-bound now in a makeshift splint, staring fixedly at his own saddle horn like it, holds the answer to some unbearable question, he doesn't say so out loud. Otis lingers after the sheriff's small procession disappears down the darkened road, hat in his hands, uncertain. Mrs. Marsh. His voice is quiet. I ain't never seen nobody move like that. Not even the fellas who used to fight over cattle up north. That was, go home, Otis. Gentle. Final. Your family will be worried. He hesitates a moment longer, wanting, clearly, to ask the question hanging unspoken in the air between them. But something in her face stops him, not unkindness, just an absolute, immovable wall, and he nods instead, mounts up, and rides off into the dark, with a great deal more to think about than he had riding in. Addie stands alone in the yard for a long moment after he's gone. The fog is starting to roll back in, thin and pale, catching the last of the moonlight. Somewhere behind her, the farmhouse window glows warm and gold Jonah. She knows, watching from behind the curtain, having been told to stay inside and, for once, having actually obeyed, she goes to him first. Always him first. He's sitting on the floor by the window, knees pulled to his chest, and when she kneels down beside him, he throws himself into her arms with a force that nearly knocks her backward. "I was scared," he whispers into her shoulder. "I know, baby. I know." She holds him tight, one hand cradling the back of his head, the same gesture Elias used to make, the same gesture she's carried forward, without ever quite meaning to. "It's over now. Nobody's going to hurt you. Not while I'm standing. Are you going to leave again? Like tonight?" The question catches somewhere in her chest, sharp and unexpected. "I didn't leave, Jonah. I was right here the whole time. You look different." His small face upturned, searching hers with the uncomplicated honesty only children manage. "Out there, you looked like somebody else." Addie doesn't answer right away. Because there isn't an answer simple enough for a 6-year-old, and there isn't an answer honest enough that wouldn't terrify him, and somewhere in the space between those two impossibilities she just holds him instead, tighter, until his breathing slows, and his small body goes heavy and sleep finally claims him where he sits. She carries him to bed, tucks the quilt up under his chin, watches him for a long moment in the lamplight, the way she does most nights, memorizing the shape of his face like it might disappear if she looks away too long. Then she goes back downstairs. The kitchen is dark, except for the lamp, and quiet, except for the small, ordinary sounds of a house settling into night, a shutter easing against its frame, the stove ticking as it cools, the distant call of some night bird out past the tree line. And she does the thing she hasn't done in 2 years. In the corner of the kitchen, beneath a floorboard that looks, to any casual eye, exactly like every other floorboard in the house, a little worn, a little uneven. Nothing worth a second glance. There's a groove her fingers find without needing to look, a groove worn smooth by a habit she thought she'd broken. She pries it up. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth, gone soft and dark with age, is a wooden box. Small, unremarkable, the kind of box that could hold love letters, or a wedding ring, or nothing of consequence at all. She sets it on the table, doesn't open it yet, just looks at it, hand resting flat on the lid, the way you might rest a hand on a door you know, once opened, cannot ever be fully closed again. She finally lifts the lid. Inside a second, smaller pistol, cleaned and oiled despite 2 years of silence, because some habits never really stop, they just go quiet. A tarnished silver badge, the kind issued by a private bureau rather than any government office. The engraving on its face worn nearly smooth by years of being touched, turned over, held. And beneath both of those, folded so many times the creases have gone soft as cloth, a single photograph. She doesn't take the photograph out, not tonight. She isn't ready for the face in it, isn't ready for what looking at it might drag up alongside itself. But she knows it's there, knows exactly whose face is folded into that square of paper waiting. Silas Vane. The man who trained her, the man who named her, the man who, as far as she knows, has never once stopped looking for the people who once belonged to him. She closes the box, doesn't put it away this time, sets it instead on the shelf above the hearth, in plain sight, the way you'd set out a weapon you no longer intend to hide, because some part of her, the old part, the trained part, already knows it won't be staying buried much longer. The jailhouse in Harlow Creek is a small brick building behind the sheriff's office, 3 cells, a stove that never quite heats the far corner, and a single barred window in each cell that looks out on nothing more interesting than the alley behind the feed store. It's where the 3 men spend the night, and where, the following afternoon, Whitfield allows Addie a few minutes to stand in the narrow hall outside their cells, ostensibly to confirm their identities for his report. The lead writer, his name, according to the papers found in his coat, is Deacon Ross, though Addie doubts it's the name his mother gave him. Sits on the edge of his cot, wrist bound in a proper splint now, and looks up when her shadow falls across the bars. "Come to gloat?" His voice is rougher than it was in the yard, stripped of the confidence that made it easy to underestimate the danger she posed. Or you come to finish the job proper this time? I came to ask a question. Ask it then. Addie glances once toward the end of the hall, where Whitfield stands just out of easy earshot, giving her the illusion of privacy without actually granting it. She lowers her voice anyway, out of habit, out of the old training that says, information is a currency, best spent quietly. Who sent you? Ross's jaw works for a moment, something like defiance flickering behind his eyes, before it collapses, slowly, into something closer to resignation. Don't know his name. Never met him proper. Just a man who found us in Widmark, paid good money to ride out here, ask around, see what kind of resistance a certain widow's farm was likely to put up before anybody tried anything bigger. Before anybody tried anything bigger, she repeats, flat. That's what he said. Said it plain as that. Said you were a test. Said if you folded easy, there'd be more men coming behind us, and they wouldn't be near so polite about asking for silver. Ross looks up at her now, something almost pleading in his expression, the look of a man who has started to suspect he was on the wrong side of something much larger than a simple robbery. We didn't know what we were walking into, ma'am. I swear it. You'd have ridden out here anyway. For the money. Addie's voice doesn't rise, doesn't sharpen. It doesn't need to. He has the grace, at least, to look ashamed of that. In the next cell, the younger man, the one whose rifle she'd shot clean out of his hands, sits with his bandaged fingers cradled against his chest, watching her with the wariness of someone who has decided, overnight, that the widow Marsh is the single most dangerous thing he has ever personally encountered. You got a description, Addie says. Not quite a question. Of the man who paid you. The words tumble out fast. Older fella. Gray at the temples. Dressed nicer than most men who do that kind of hiring, proper coat, proper boots. Spoke real careful, like every word cost him something to spend. And his eyes. Something wrong with the way he looked at you. Like he was already deciding what you were worth, before you'd said a single word to him. Where did this man find you? Widmark. Saloon there. Said his name was Marsh. Same as yours. Said it real deliberate, too, like it was supposed to mean something to us. The floor seems to tilt very slightly beneath Addie's feet. Marsh. Her husband's name worn like a mask. Thank you, she says. That's all I needed. She turns to go, and Ross's voice follows her down the narrow hall. Quieter now, stripped of every last trace of the confidence he'd carried into her yard the evening before. Ma'am, whoever he is, whatever he wants with you, I hope you got more than a hammer and a rifle waiting for him. Addie doesn't turn around, but something in her chest, cold and old and very nearly ready, agrees with him completely. The road into town the next morning is quieter than usual, and not the ordinary quiet of an early hour. A different quiet. The kind that comes from a story having already traveled faster than the person at the center of it. At the sheriff's office, Whitfield leans back in his chair, studying her with the unhurried patience of a man who has spent 20 years, learning to read the things people don't say out loud. Mrs. Marsh, I've known you 2 years now. Watched you carry that boy of yours through more hardship than most folks see in a lifetime, and never once heard you complain about a single ounce of it. He pauses. Last night you disarmed 3 armed men in under a minute, on your own porch, without so much as raising your voice past a whisper. That's not something a farm widow does. I got lucky. No. He says it plainly without accusation. You didn't. And I don't need you to explain yourself if you're not of a mind to. Man's entitled to his history. Woman too, I expect, same as any man. He taps the scrap of paper on his desk, 3 false names staring up at both of them. But whatever's behind this isn't finished, just because I've got these 3 locked up out back. If something else comes, she says finally, I'll need to know I can count on you. Not questions first. Just count on you. You can count on me, Mrs. Marsh, he says. Whatever else you are. He studies her a moment longer, and there's something careful in the way he does it. D-die, he says. That mean anything to you? The box on the shelf, the badge, the folded photograph, all of it flashes behind her eyes, in the space of a single held breath. Should it? He holds her gaze. The way a man does when he suspects there's a door in front of him, he isn't quite brave enough to knock on yet. Suppose it shouldn't, he says, though he doesn't sound entirely convinced. Outside, walking back toward the wagon, she catches Josiah Kettle watching her from across the street. Arms crossed, an expression on his face that has shifted, overnight, from calculation into something closer to caution. He touches his hat once, doesn't approach, and the offer on her east acreage, she suspects, standing there in the cold morning light, is about to quietly stop being mentioned. It's on the ride home that she feels it again, that same cold stillness from the porch 3 mornings ago. She looks up toward the ridge that borders the eastern edge of her land, the one that catches the morning light first every day. There's a rider on it now, still, unmoving, too far to make out a face, but the shape doesn't move. Just sits there, watching for the length of 3 full breaths, before finally, unhurried, turning its horse and disappearing back over the far side of the ridge. Addie doesn't say anything to Jonah, just watches the empty ridge a moment longer, the way you'd watch a door that had just, very quietly, been left open somewhere behind you. Because a name spoken once is a name that travels. That night, once Jonah is asleep, Addie sits again at the kitchen table, the wooden box open in front of her. She takes the photograph out this time. Finally, unfolds it along creases gone soft as cloth. Silas Vane looks back at her from a decade-old likeness, unsmiling, composed, the same patient appraisal in his eyes that she remembers from that very first cold hallway. You've been wasting these. She thinks of Elias, 2 years dead, and the last honest thing he ever said to her, lying together in the dark with Jonah asleep down the hall. You ever miss it? The other life? She'd told him no, told him the truth, as she understood it then, that she didn't miss the danger, didn't miss the violence. What she missed, if she missed anything at all, was simpler than that. She missed being certain. Farm life didn't offer that same certainty. Grief certainly didn't, but threats did. Addie folds the photograph back along its old creases, tucks it beneath the badge, closes the lid. And Addie Marsh, widow, mother, farmer, the woman this whole town believed was one bad season from ruin, stands in her own kitchen in the deep autumn dark and understands that whatever is coming for her now has a name too, and she intends to be ready for it, long before it ever reaches her door again. 3 days after the ridge. That's how Addie counts it now. Not days of the week, not dates on a calendar tacked to the pantry wall. Just before the ridge and after. Because before, she was a widow with a farm and a boy and a grief she'd learned to carry quietly. And after, she's something else. Something she hasn't fully named yet, even to herself. Sitting alone at the kitchen table, with dawn still an hour off, and the wooden box gone from its shelf above the hearth, opened again, laid out across the wood like evidence in a trial. Nobody else has been told is happening. The badge, the photograph, the second pistol, cleaned twice now instead of once, because her hands needed something to do, while her mind did the harder work of deciding what all of this means. She hasn't slept properly in 3 nights. Won't, she suspects, until she understands exactly what she's facing. That was always the rule, back when the name Deadai meant something to people who paid for that meaning. You don't move on a threat you can't see the shape of. You wait. You gather. You let the fear do its work on the men who deserve it, instead of the other way around. Except waiting has never once, in her whole life, come easy. And it comes harder now, with a 6-year-old boy asleep upstairs who has no idea his mother is sitting in the dark, rebuilding a version of herself she buried on purpose. The rider on the ridge hasn't returned. Not that she's seen. Which means nothing. Which means, if anything, less than nothing. Because a man patient enough to send 3 strangers to test her defenses before showing himself is not a man who's going to make the mistake of being seen twice. So she starts where she can, with what she has. Deacon Ross's voice, thin and frightened in a jail cell. Older fella, gray at the temples. Said his name was Marsh. Said it real deliberate. Her husband's name, worn like a mask, by a man buying violence in a Widmark saloon. Not her name. Not Deadai. Marsh. Chosen, deliberately, to make certain that whoever eventually pieced the message together would understand precisely who it was meant for. Which means somebody out there already knows exactly what she calls herself now. Knows the farm, the boy, the name on the deed. Knows enough, in other words, that 3 days of silence isn't safety. It's just the quiet part before the next move. Because that's how Vane always worked. She remembers this now with the particular clarity of a lesson she never asked to learn twice. He didn't rush, he tested first. sent smaller pieces forward to see what kind of resistance waited on the other side, and only then, once he understood exactly what he was dealing with, did he commit anything that actually mattered to him. 3 drifters were the test, which means whatever comes next won't be 3 drifters at all. She sits with that thought until the window goes from black to gray, until the rooster finally works up the nerve to try, and by the time Jonah wakes and comes stumbling down in his nightshirt, hair a wild nest, eyes half shut, she has already made a decision she isn't yet ready to say out loud. She isn't going to wait for the next move to arrive at her door. She's going to go looking for it first. The place where Elias died sits 2 miles east of the farmhouse, along a stretch of trail that cuts down through a shallow ravine before climbing back up toward the county road. Addie hasn't ridden this stretch in 2 years. Not once. Not even the day of the funeral, when half the town rode out to search the ravine for anything the first search might have missed. She rides it now, alone, while Otis watches Jonah back at the farm with a rifle across his knees and instructions that would have sounded, to anyone overhearing them, entirely unlike anything a grieving widow ought to know how to say. Anyone comes up that road you don't recognize. You get him inside, and you bar the door. You don't open it again until you hear my voice. Not a knock. Not a name. My voice. Otis hadn't argued. Just nodded, slow. The way a person nods when they've started to understand that the world they thought they were standing in has quietly become a different one overnight. The ravine looks exactly the way it did in her memory, which is, itself, a kind of horror that a place capable of ending something so large could remain so completely, indifferently unchanged. Rock scrub brush, a game trail winding down toward the dry creek bed below. Elias's horse threw him here, or so the story went. Struck a loose stone on the descent, stumbled, and Elias, a good rider, a careful rider, a man who had ridden this exact stretch 100 times without incident, went over the animal's shoulder and struck his head against the rock outcropping that still sits, unchanged, 20 feet below the trail. An accident. That's what the coroner wrote. That's what the whole town believed, and grieved, and slowly, gently, stopped talking about. Addie dismounts at the top of the trail and stands very still, the way she used to stand before entering any room she didn't yet trust, and lets her eyes do the work her heart has spent 2 years refusing to let them do. Because grief closes eyes as surely as it closes doors. She understands that now, standing here, in a way she couldn't afford to understand it. The week Elias died, with a 4-year-old needing her whole attention, needing a mother who could still function, still feed him, still hold him through the nights he woke, calling for a father who wasn't coming back. She hadn't looked closely. Couldn't. Wouldn't have known what she was looking for even if she had. She knows now. The rock outcropping first. She kneels beside it, fingers tracing the stone's surface, and finds exactly what a trained eye finds, and an untrained one never would, a mark on the rock's edge that doesn't match the story. A clean strike, narrow, deliberate, the kind a falling body doesn't make, the kind a weapon makes. Her stomach turns over, slow and cold. She moves next to the trail itself, searching the loose stone the coroner's report blamed for the horse's stumble, and finds it exactly where the report said it would be, except wrong. Wrong in a way only someone who has spent years reading terrain the way other people read letters would ever notice. The stone sits too neatly in its gap, as if placed there, as if the trail's natural wear had been interrupted, deliberately, by a hand that understood exactly how such an accident ought to look. Because a horse doesn't stumble on a stone that's been there 20 years without incident. Not unless something changes the arithmetic. Not unless somebody changes it for her. She sits back on her heels, breath coming faster now than the climb down warrants, and lets the full weight of it land. Elias didn't fall. He was put here. Killed here, and arranged here, with enough care that a grieving town, a grieving wife, a coroner with no reason to look twice, would all see exactly what they expected to see. An accident, a tragedy, nothing more. Which means the question that's haunted her for 2 years. Why now? Why here? Why did the one good, gentle thing in her life get taken from her right when she'd finally built something worth keeping? Has an answer after all. Somebody wanted her alone. Somebody wanted a woman with no husband, no protector, no reason left to stay hidden, except a boy small enough to need her, because a woman alone is easier to watch. easier to test, easier eventually to move against. Once the moment came to finish whatever unfinished business had followed her out of that old life and settled, patient as a debt, over this quiet farm. Addie stands slowly, looking down at the dry creek bed where her husband's body was found 2 years ago, and something in her chest, something that has been grieving quietly and privately for 2 years, finally, completely, turns into something else. Not grief anymore. Not only grief, because grief asks why, and Addie already knows the answer now. What comes after grief, once the why is finally, terribly clear, isn't sadness at all. She stands at the edge of the ravine a long while, longer than she means to, the cold working up through her boots, and lets herself remember him here, not the death, the life, because she owes him that much, standing on the ground that took him. Elias, laughing at something small and foolish, the way he always laughed, whole body, unguarded, a man who had never once needed to learn the particular art of hiding what he felt. Elias, teaching Jonah to whistle through a blade of grass on this very trail, not 2 months before the ride that ended him, the boy's face screwed up in fierce concentration, his father's hand steady over his. She hadn't told him everything, even in that last honest conversation in the dark, had given him the truth in pieces, the parts that felt safe to hand over, and kept the rest sealed away, in a box beneath a floorboard where it couldn't touch him, except it touched him anyway. In the end, reached across 2 years and found him on a quiet trail he'd ridden 100 times without incident, and took him, deliberately, precisely, because some part of who she used to be had never actually stopped following her home. Which means his death isn't only a grief now, it's a debt, and Addie Marsh has never once, in her whole life, left a debt, like this one, unanswered. She kneels one more time beside the rock outcropping, presses her palm flat against the cold stone, the way she might press it against a grave marker, and makes a promise she has no intention of breaking. I know now, she says quiet, to nobody, to the empty ravine, to the husband who can't hear her. I'm sorry it took me this long. Then she rises, and mounts, and rides back toward the trail's climb without once looking behind her, because looking behind her has never once changed anything about what waits ahead. The ride back to the farmhouse takes longer than it should, not because the horse is slow, but because Addie lets it be slow, lets the miles unspool at their own unhurried pace, while her mind does the harder work of turning grief into strategy. Because that's the only way she knows how to survive a thing like this. Feel it once, completely, at the source. Then fold it away and let the trained part of her take over, the part that doesn't waste time on what should have been and spends it instead on what happens next. Which means she needs to know who, not just the shape of him older, careful, patient, gray at the temples, but the name behind the shape. Because a shape can't be stopped. A name can. And there is only one name in her whole life that fits a silhouette like that. Only one man who ever taught her, patiently, deliberately, that the bullet is the last thing that happens and everything that matters happens before it. Only one man who would understand, better than anyone alive, exactly how to make a murder look like nothing at all, and exactly how long to wait afterward before circling back to finish what the murder was meant to start. She doesn't say his name out loud yet, not to the empty road, not to the horse. Some names, she has learned, gather weight the moment they're spoken, and she isn't ready yet to carry that particular weight in the open air. But she's close. Close enough that by the time the farmhouse comes into view, chimney smoke rising thin and gray against the darkening sky, she already knows where the next piece of the truth is waiting. She just needs someone else to say the name first. Confirm it. Make it real. In a way her own suspicion, however certain, cannot quite manage on its own. There's a blacksmith who lives a half-mile from the ravine, a quiet man named Amos Deer, who Addie has bought nails and hinges from for years, without ever exchanging more than a dozen words with him at a time. She rides there next, because Amos Deer's forge sits close enough to the trail that anyone passing through late at night would have to pass within earshot of it, and because Amos Deer, she remembers now, was the one small detail in the coroner's report she'd never followed up on. A note, a single line. Blacksmith reports, hearing riders on the trail the night in question. Unable to confirm number or direction. Nobody had pressed him further. Why would they? It was an accident, nothing to investigate. Amos is at his forge when she arrives, Hammer paused mid-swing at the sight of her riding up alone, something careful crossing his weathered face. Mrs. Marsh, a nod. Don't often see you out this way. I need to ask you something, Mr. Dear. About 2 years back, the night my husband died. His hammer lowers slowly, sets down against the anvil with a small final clink. Wondered if somebody'd ever come ask me proper, he says. Told the sheriff what I heard back then. Nobody seemed to think it mattered much. Tell me now. He studies her a long moment. The way men in this territory study a question. They're not certain. They're allowed to answer honestly. Heard 2 riders, he says finally. Not 1. 2 moving slow. Maybe an hour before your husband's horse came back through here alone, screaming fit to wake the dead. Didn't think nothing of 2 riders on a trail at night. Happens plenty out here. But I remember it plain because they weren't headed toward town. They were headed away from it. Fast. Like men who'd finished something and didn't want to be found lingering over it. The cold in Addie's chest deepens, spreads, settles into something with edges. Did you see them? Dark that night. Couldn't say faces. He hesitates. But one of the horses. I know horses, Mrs. Marsh, better than I know most people. One of them had a particular gait, favored the left hind. Slight. The kind of thing you'd only notice if you'd shod that exact animal before. Had you? Once. Fine gray gelding, brought in by a stranger passing through, maybe a month before your husband's accident. Paid well. Didn't give a name. Man riding it was older. Gray at the temples himself. Spoke careful, like every word cost him something to spend. The words land with a precision that steals the breath clean out of Addie's chest, because they are, nearly word for word, the same description a frightened young prisoner gave her in a jail cell 3 days ago. The same man, once riding away from the place her husband died, once hiring 3 strangers in a Widmark saloon to test the widow he left behind. Thank you, Mr. Dear, she says, and her voice comes out steadier than she has any right to expect, given the way the whole world has just quietly, permanently rearranged itself around her. Mrs. Marsh. He calls after her as she mounts back up, something urgent in his voice now. That man, whoever he is, you be careful. A rider patient enough to wait an hour on a dark trail before doing what he came to do. That's not a man who does anything without meaning it clean through. I know exactly what kind of man he is, Addie says, and for the first time since the ridge, something in her voice sounds less like fear and more like the particular, dangerous calm of a woman who has finally, completely stopped waiting to understand her enemy. She already understands him. She trained under him. She doesn't tell Otis everything. Can't. Some of it isn't hers alone to give away, and some of it, if she's honest with herself, she still isn't ready to say out loud to another living person. But she tells him enough. Somebody killed my husband, she says, standing in the yard at dusk while Jonah plays within careful sight of the porch. Made it look like an accident. And whoever did it is the same person who sent those 3 men to test this farm 3 nights ago. Otis goes very still, hat clutched in both hands, the easy grin he wears more often than not entirely absent now. Why, he says. Just that. One word. Quiet. Careful. I don't know yet. Not the whole of it. A lie. Or close enough to one. But I know he's not finished. And I know he's not going to send strangers again. Not now that he understands what kind of resistance he's dealing with. Then what's he going to do? Come himself. Eventually. Or send someone he trusts more than 3 drifters he found drinking in a Widmark saloon. She looks toward the tree line. I need you to trust me on some things I can't explain yet, Otis. Can you do that? He's quiet a long moment, turning the hat over in his hands. And when he finally answers, there's something new in his voice, not the easy loyalty of a hired hand anymore, but something closer to the loyalty of a man who has decided, deliberately, what side of a fight he intends to stand on. Mrs. Marsh, I seen what you did to those 3 men. Seen it plain, with my own eyes, and I still don't rightly understand half of it. He straightens, but I know you didn't do it out of meanness. And I know whatever you're carrying it to keep that boy safe, same as you'd carry anything else that needed carrying. So, yeah, I trust you. Don't need the whole story to know which side I'm standing on. Something in Addie's chest loosens, just slightly. Thank you, she says. That matters more than you know. What do you need me to do? Watch the road. Watch the ridge. And if you see anyone approaching who isn't me, isn't Whitfield, isn't somebody Jonah already knows by name, you don't wait to find out who they are. You get him inside, bar the door, and you fire a warning shot into the air. I'll hear it. Wherever I am on this land, I'll hear it. Otis nods, slow and solemn, the weight of the responsibility settling visibly onto his young shoulders. And you, Mrs. Marsh? What are you going to do? Addie looks past him, toward the horizon, toward whatever is out there, patient and gray-templed and utterly certain that a farm widow in Wyoming Territory has finally, after 2 long years, run out of places left to hide. I'm going to stop waiting for him to decide when this happens, she says, and I'm going to make sure that whatever comes next happens on ground I chose. Not ground he did. Otis nods once slow and turns to go back toward the barn, and Addie watches him a moment longer, this earnest, untested young man who reminds her so often of who she used to be before she understood the full cost of it. That night, once Jonah is asleep, once Otis has taken up a quiet post near the barn with a rifle and a lantern turned low, Addie sits again at the kitchen table with the photograph unfolded in front of her and lets herself finally ask the question she's been circling for 3 days without quite landing on it. Why now? Why here? Why, after all this silence? After a man told her plainly, in a cold stone hallway, that names like hers don't die. They just wait? Why has that waiting finally ended? The answer, when it comes, arrives the way the worst answers always do. Quietly, completely, with no room left to argue against it. Because she was never meant to be the only witness left. The memory surfaces slow, reluctant, dragged up from a part of her mind she has spent 2 years trying to keep sealed, her 4th year with the Bureau. A job that wasn't like the others, not a rescue, not a recovery, but something Vane called, in the careful, bloodless language he used for everything, a correction. A senator's aide, dead in a hotel room. Officially, a robbery gone wrong. Unofficially, she had been in that hotel the same night, on an entirely separate job, and had seen, through a half-open door, exactly who walked out of that room 40 minutes before the body was discovered. Vane himself. She never asked him about it. Some part of her, even then, understood that asking would mean choosing a side. She wasn't certain she was prepared to choose, and so she'd simply filed it away and let it go quiet, the way everything eventually went quiet, given enough time. But quiet isn't the same as gone. And a man like Vane, however patient, however careful, does not build an empire out of correction and secrecy without eventually needing to account for every loose thread capable of unraveling it. A handful of people who knew the truth of that night, one by one, over the years, meeting quiet, unremarkable ends that nobody ever thought to connect. And Addie Marsh, formerly Dee, formerly the Bureau's finest and most trusted shooter, who saw exactly what she wasn't supposed to see, and who has spent years first hiding in plain sight as an operative too valuable to question, then hiding entirely, under a dead man's name, on a farm 2 territories away being, without ever fully understanding it, the very last loose thread left. Elias didn't die because of anything he did. He died because killing him, quietly, cleanly, disguised as an accident on a dark trail, was the fastest way to strip away everything holding her in place. No husband to protect. No reason left to stay rooted to one small piece of land. A grieving widow, alone with a child, is a woman who can be watched, tested, and eventually removed without the complications a living husband might have introduced. Except it hadn't worked, not the way Vane intended. Because instead of running, instead of collapsing under grief the way he must have calculated she would, Addie had stayed, had dug in, had raised her son on that same land, quietly, patiently, for 2 more years, giving Vane every reason to believe the threat she once represented had finally, permanently gone dormant. Until 3 drifters rode onto her land and discovered, in under 30 seconds, exactly how mistaken that belief had been. She thinks, too, of something else now, a smaller memory, one she'd never once connected to any of this until tonight. A letter that arrived 18 months ago, unsigned, postmarked from a town she didn't recognize, containing nothing but a single pressed flower and no words at all. She'd assumed it was mailed to the wrong address, tucked it into a drawer, and forgotten it within the week, too consumed with grief and grain prices, and a boy learning to walk without his father's hand to steady him. She understands it differently now. Because a man like Vane doesn't waste gestures. The flower, she suspects now, sitting cold and certain at her kitchen table, was never a mistake at all. It was a message, sent 18 months ago. I know where you are. I am not finished watching. And she'd missed it entirely, too buried in her own grief to notice the shape of the hand that had caused it. Addie sits with the full weight of that realization, a long moment, the anger in her chest sharpening into something colder, more useful. The particular clarity Vane himself once trained into her, because the man who built her, who trained her, who gave her a name that made grown men flinch, is the same man who took her husband from her. Deliberately, coldly, as a calculated first move in a plan 2 years in the making, and he is not finished. It comes 4 days later, on a morning cold enough that frost has crept clear up the inside of the kitchen window, in the form of a folded piece of paper tucked beneath a stone on the porch step, placed there sometime in the night, silently, by someone Otis never heard, never saw, despite a full night's watch from the barn. Addie finds it before Jonah wakes, and unfolds it with hands that go very, very still the moment she recognizes the handwriting. Careful, precise. Each letter formed with the same unhurried patience she remembers from years of reviewing reports in a cold stone office, a pen tapping out judgments that decided, sometimes, whether a person lived or didn't. Addie, you always were the only one who saw all the way through to the end of a thing. I should have accounted for that sooner. I'm told the farm suits you. I'm told you've built something worth protecting. I understand that better than you might imagine. I built something too, once. You. We should speak. Properly. Before this becomes something neither of us can walk back from. I'll come to you soon. Not with strangers this time. SV. Addie reads it twice, then a third time, and sets it down on the table with a steadiness that costs her more than anything has cost her in 2 full years. Because there it is. Confirmation, in his own careful hand, of everything the Ravine, the blacksmith, and years of buried memory have already told her. He knows exactly where she is. Except her guard isn't lowering. Not anymore. Not since the ridge, not since the ravine, not since a blacksmith's quiet testimony connected a dead husband to a gray-templed stranger with a voice that costs every word something to spend. She reads the letter once more before closing the lid on the box beside it, not to memorize the words she already has, every one of them, but because something in the tone of it, underneath the careful, patient phrasing, feels almost like an apology. Almost like the closest thing a man like Silas Vane has ever offered anyone to regret. I should have accounted for that sooner. Which means, perhaps, he never expected her to survive this long. Never expected a girl he built out of raw material to become someone capable of surviving her own maker's patience. She finds standing at the window with frost, still clinging to the far corners of the glass, that the thought doesn't frighten her the way it might have 3 days ago. Because he taught her everything he knows, every technique, every calculation, every ounce of the cold, careful patience that made her the finest shooter the Bureau ever trained. Which means, whatever he sends next, whoever he becomes when he finally rides up that road himself, she will not be facing a stranger. She will be facing a mirror. And nobody, in this world or any other, understands a mirror's weaknesses better than the woman staring back into it. Outside, the frost is beginning to burn off the fence posts. Another morning, dressed up and pretending, for just a little while longer, to be ordinary. But Addie Marsh stands at her kitchen window, letter in hand, and understands with a clarity that feels almost like relief after 2 long years of careful, exhausting fog, that the waiting hers and his both is finally at long last coming to an end. Soon, he wrote. She intends to make certain that when soon finally arrives, it arrives on ground she chose. Not ground he did. Because that was always the last lesson he never quite finished teaching her, back in that cold stone hallway, all those years ago. The one about choosing your ground before your enemy chooses it for you. She learned it anyway, on her own, the hard way. And she intends, when the moment finally comes, to make certain he understands exactly how well. Soon he'd written. 1 word, and it has hung over the farm for 6 days now, the way a storm hangs on a horizon long before the first drop ever falls. Addie doesn't wait for it passively. That was never the plan. Because waiting, she learned a long time ago, is only safe when you spend it preparing, and she has spent every one of these 6 days preparing the way she once prepared for jobs that mattered more than her own life. She walks the property line at dawn, marking, in her mind, every approach a rider could take. The main road, wide and exposed, the one a confident man might choose. The tree line to the east, thick enough to hide movement, but narrow enough to funnel anyone coming through it into a single, predictable path. The Ravine trail, the one that took Elias, the one she now understands well enough to know exactly how a careful man might use it to approach unseen. She clears sight lines from the porch, moves the woodpile 6 feet to the left, opening a clean line of fire toward the barn without anyone noticing the change, unless they were looking for it, which nobody in Harlow Creek would think to do. Rehangs the Winchester in a spot her hand can find blind, in the dark, in a panic, without a single wasted motion. Because that's the thing about a reckoning. It doesn't announce its hour. It only announces that it's coming and leaves the rest the when, the how, the shape it finally takes to arrive exactly when you're least prepared to receive it. Unless you refuse to let it, which is exactly what she intends to do. Because waiting for him to choose the hour means waiting for him to choose the ground too. And she has spent years learning exactly what a man like Vane does with chosen ground. So she chooses first. Every fence post moved, every sightline cleared, every small, invisible preparation a woman making bread and mending fences would never think to make. Except this particular woman has spent years thinking of little else, until her hands ache from it. Until Jonah asks, twice in one afternoon, why she keeps walking the same stretch of yard over and over. Like she's counting something nobody else can see, she tells him she's checking the fence line for winter. It isn't entirely a lie. Whitfield rides out twice that week, ostensibly to check on the aftermath of the robbery, though Addie suspects, correctly, that his visits are really about something else entirely. About a man who has started to understand that the widow Marsh is carrying a weight far larger than grief, and who has decided quietly, without ever quite saying so aloud, that he intends to be standing nearby when that weight finally comes due. Anything I should know, he asks. The second visit, standing in her yard with his hat in his hands. Someone's coming, Addie says. Soon. I don't know exactly when. Someone from your old life. Yes. Whitfield nods slowly, turning his hat over once in his hands. You want my help handling it? I want you nowhere near this farm when it happens, Caleb. Her voice softens, just slightly, the use of his given name doing more work than the words themselves. This isn't your fight, and whoever's coming won't hesitate to remove anyone standing between him and what he wants. I won't have that be you. And if I don't listen, then I'll have one more thing to worry about besides staying alive. A small, tired smile. Please, Caleb, let me handle this the way I know how. He studies her a long moment, something reluctant and respectful warring behind his eyes, and finally nods again, slower this time. An agreement he clearly isn't fully at peace with. I'll be in town, he says, close enough to hear trouble, far enough to stay out of your way till you need me. That's the best I can offer. It's enough. It isn't. Not really. Nothing feels like enough. Standing on the edge of a reckoning years in the making, but it's more than she expected, and she carries the small comfort of it with her back into the house, back to a boy who has no idea, still, exactly what kind of storm his mother is quietly, methodically preparing to weather. It's the 7th day when she finds it. A small folded note, tucked inside the lining of Otis's saddlebag, discovered entirely by accident while she searches for a spare cinch strap he'd borrowed the week before. Her name on it. Not Addie. Not Mrs. Marsh. Dead-eye. She sits with the saddlebag in her lap for a long, cold moment before she reads the note itself, and when she finally does, something in her chest goes very still. The particular stillness that arrives just before the worst kind of understanding. Report her movements. Who visits? When she rides out alone. Payment as agreed, so long as the information keeps coming. Your sister's debts stay covered, so long as you keep your part of this arrangement. No signature. Doesn't need one, because she already knows. She finds Otis at the barn that evening, mending a bridle by lantern light, and the moment he looks up and sees her face, sees the note in her hand, something in his own expression collapses entirely, not surprise, she realizes. Relief. The terrible, guilty relief of a person who has been carrying a secret too heavy to hold alone. Mrs. Marsh. His voice comes out, cracked, young, utterly wrecked. I can explain. Then explain my sister. He sets the bridle down, hands shaking now, unable to meet her eyes. She's in Cheyenne. Married a man, who ran up debts he couldn't cover, then ran off and left her holding all of it. Man came to me a month back, said he knew about her situation, said if I just told him things. Where you rode, who came calling, when you were alone. His voice breaks fully now. Said nobody would get hurt. Said it was just information. I didn't know, I swear to God, Mrs. Marsh. I didn't know what it was for till those 3 men showed up that night. And even then I told myself maybe it wasn't connected, maybe Otis. Her voice, quiet, cuts through his spiraling exactly the way it's trained to cut through chaos. Look at me. He does finally, eyes wet, face pale as the moon rising behind him. Is that man Silas Vane? I don't know a name. Just a man who found me at the Hendersons' one evening. Gray hair, careful voice. Otis swallows hard. Older fella. Spoke like every word cost him something. The description lands exactly where she expected it to. And something in her chest, already braced for betrayal, softens instead because the boy in front of her isn't a traitor. He's a scared 19-year-old who made a desperate choice for a sister he loves. The same kind of choice, she understands now, that she might have made herself once, given the right pressure applied to the right vulnerable place. Have you told him anything today this week? No, ma'am. Not since. Not since I understood what it was really for. I've been trying to figure how to tell you without you throwing me off this land forever. A broken, pleading breath. I know I don't deserve you trusting me again. I know that. But I had to tell somebody, and there ain't nobody else who'd understand what it's like, being backed into a corner that tight. Addie studies him a long moment, the anger she expected to feel arriving instead as something closer to grief. Grief for a boy too young to have learned. Yet that some men build their power entirely out of other people's desperation. You should have come to me the moment he approached you, she says. I know, but you're telling me now. Before it cost anyone their life. She sets the note down on the workbench between them, deliberate, final. That matters, Otis. It doesn't undo what happened, but it matters. What happens now? Addie looks past him, toward the darkening tree line, toward whatever is out there, patient and certain, believing it still holds a young man's loyalty as leverage. Now she says, we use what he doesn't know he's lost. The plan forms fast, once the shape of it arrives, because that was always Vane's teaching too. Delivered years ago in a cold stone office. The best deception isn't the one that hides everything. It's the one that hands your enemy exactly what he expects to see and lets his own certainty do the rest of the work for you. You're going to send him one more report, Addie tells Otis. The following morning, the two of them standing in the barn's early light, like conspirators in a war neither of them chose. True enough to be believed, wrong enough to matter. What do I tell him? That I ride out alone every evening to visit my husband's grave. Same hour, same road, undefended, a pause, which is true, except for one detail you'll leave out. What detail? That I won't be alone at all. Otis's face, still pale from the night before, sharpens now with something new, not fear exactly, though there's plenty of that still sitting underneath it, but purpose. You want me to lure him in. I want him to believe he's found the one moment I've finally let my guard down. Because a man that patient, that careful, won't come at a farm bristling with defenses. He'll wait for exactly the opening you're about to hand him. Addie's voice carries the particular calm of a woman who has finally, after 2 long years, stopped reacting to danger and started shaping it instead. And when he takes it, he'll be walking into ground I chose. Not ground he did. They send the message that same afternoon through the same dead drop. Otis has used for weeks a hollow fence post a half-mile down the county road. Checked, Otis admits with fresh shame. Every 3rd day by a rider who never once shows his face directly. By nightfall, the note is gone. Read, received. And somewhere out there, Addie knows with a certainty that settles cold and clean into her chest, a man who once told her that names like hers don't die, they only wait, is already making his own quiet preparations. He has no idea yet that the waiting is about to end on someone else's terms. The evening arrives gray and still, the particular stillness that settles over Wyoming Territory just before the season's first real snow, when the whole world seems to be holding its breath in anticipation of something it can't yet name. Addie rides out alone at the appointed hour, exactly as the false report promised, down the same road she and Jonah have walked 100 times, past the same fence line, toward the same small white church with its low iron gate, except alone isn't quite the truth of it. Not entirely. Because 200 yards back, moving parallel through the tree line with a rifle across his saddle and a promise to stay hidden until he heard her signal, rides Otis, given one final chance to prove, with actions instead of words, exactly which side of this he has chosen. And because Whitfield, against her explicit wishes, has positioned himself a half-mile further down the county road, close enough to reach the churchyard within minutes of any trouble, far enough to have honored, in the strictest technical sense, her request that he stay out of the way until needed. She'd argued with him about it, briefly the day before. "I told you to stay in town." "You told me a lot of things, Mrs. Marsh." Whitfield's jaw had set, stubborn, immovable. "Doesn't mean I have to agree with all of them. I've buried enough good people in this county to know exactly what it costs to stand by and do nothing while trouble finds someone I respect." She hadn't argued further. Some battles, she's learned, aren't worth the breath it takes to fight them. Now, riding toward the churchyard in the gathering dusk, she feels the old calm settling over her. The trained stillness that once let her walk into rooms other people would have run from. Her hand rests easy near the Colt, at her hip, not the Winchester this time. Too cumbersome for what's coming, too much a farmer's weapon for what she suspects will be, in the end, a much older kind of conversation. The churchyard gate creaks as she opens it, the same small sound it always makes, and she walks the familiar path toward Elias's grave, with a steadiness that costs her more than it shows. "Evening, love," she says quietly, kneeling beside the stone marker. The words meant for him and for the man she knows, with absolute certainty, is already watching from somewhere close by. "I found out what happened to you. Took me longer than it should have. I'm sorry for that." Silence answers her. The wind, moving soft through the churchyard elm. A bird settling somewhere in the branches above. And then, from the tree line beyond the low iron fence, a voice she hasn't heard in years, unhurried, careful, every word costing exactly as much as she remembers. "You always did talk to the dead, like they could still hear you." Addie doesn't turn immediately, doesn't give him the satisfaction of a startled reaction, though her heart, beneath the trained calm, has begun beating hard enough to feel in her throat. "Maybe they can," she says. "Maybe that's why some of us are so careful about who we let become one." He steps out from the tree line slowly, unhurried, exactly as she remembers him, older now, gray, fully claiming the temples that were only beginning to gray the last time she saw him, but unmistakably, entirely the same man who once turned her hands over like a letter and pronounced them wasted. He's alone, that surprises her, though it shouldn't. A man who built his entire career on patience and precision would never risk bringing hired hands to a conversation this personal. "You look well," he says, stopping a careful 20 feet away, the same distance. She notices that Deacon Ross's horse had stood the night this whole business began. "Farm life suits you better than I expected it would. You killed my husband." No preamble, no pleasantries. Because there isn't room in her chest anymore for anything except the truth sitting between them. Something crosses Vane's face, not denial. She notices immediately, and something in her stomach turns cold at the absence of it. Not denial at all. Something closer to regret, careful and controlled, the way everything about this man has always been careful and controlled. "Yes," he says simply. The single word lands harder than any argument could have. Harder than a lie would have, even. Because a lie, at least, would have given her something to fight against. This flat, unapologetic honesty gives her nothing but the full, undiluted weight of exactly what he took from her. "Why? You know why, Addie. You've always been clever enough to see all the way through to the end of a thing." He takes a single step closer, and she doesn't retreat, doesn't flinch, simply holds her ground the way she spent 6 days preparing to. "You saw something you weren't meant to see, a long time ago. I've spent years since making certain the people who saw it don't remain in a position to speak of it. You were the last. So you took the one thing that mattered most to me instead. I removed an obstacle." His voice stays level, almost gentle, and that gentleness is somehow the most monstrous part of it. A husband gives a woman roots. Protection. Reason to stay visible, stay settled, stay easy to account for. Without him, I expected you to run, to disappear the way frightened people disappear, into a life too small and too mobile to ever threaten me again. Instead, I stayed. Instead, you stayed, he agrees. something almost like admiration flickering behind the careful mask of his expression. Raised a son, built a life stubborn enough to survive 2 years of grief, without ever once cracking wide enough for me to see through it. I underestimated you, Addie. I built you to be exceptional, and then I made the mistake of forgetting exactly how exceptional that made you. Something in her chest wants to scream at that, wants to close the distance and make him answer for every single morning she woke alone, in a bed too big. Every night, Jonah cried for a father who wasn't coming home. Every quiet hour she spent convincing herself it was simply bad luck, simply an accident, simply the cruel indifference of a world that sometimes takes good men for no reason at all. Except there was a reason. There was always a reason. And the reason is standing 20 feet away from her, speaking about her murdered husband, the way another man might speak about a chess piece sacrificed for a stronger position. 3 moves later, she doesn't scream, doesn't let the fury show past the careful stillness her whole body has been trained to hold under exactly this kind of pressure. Because screaming is what he expects. Screaming is what a grieving widow does. And she has spent 6 days making very certain he understands, before this moment ever arrives, that she is not merely a grieving widow anymore. Did he suffer? She asks, and her voice, quiet as it is, costs her more than anything else she has said tonight. Vane hesitates, actually hesitates, for the first time since he stepped out of the tree line, and something in that small pause tells her the answer before he speaks it. No, he says. It was quick. I saw to that much, at least. You saw to that much. Her voice flat, disbelieving, as if that's mercy. As if there's a version of taking a man from his wife and son that counts as gentle, so long as it's quick. I've done a great many things in my life I don't consider gentle, Addie. That one, I confess, sits heavier than most. Something almost human crosses his face then, gone as quickly as it arrived, folded back beneath the careful composure he has worn since the tree line. Does that surprise you? That even I keep a ledger of what costs something and what doesn't? It doesn't surprise me. It disgusts me. She takes a slow breath, forces the old training back into her spine, back into her hands, back into the steady, unshaking place it has always lived. You don't get to grieve what you did to him, Silas. Grief is mine. You only get the weight of it. You didn't build me into anything. Her voice, steady, cold, carries 6 days of preparation and 2 years of grief in equal measure. You found raw material and you shaped it toward your own ends. That's not building a person, Silas. That's using one. Is there a difference? There's every difference in the world. She takes a step forward now, closing some of the distance between them, refusing to let his calm dictate the rhythm of this conversation any longer. A person you build stays loyal because they choose to. A person you use only stays as long as the leash holds. Mine broke the day. You decided my husband was an obstacle instead of a man. Something flickers again, behind Vane's careful expression, not quite anger, not quite regret, something closer to the particular disappointment of a craftsman, discovering a flaw in work he once considered flawless. Then I suppose, he says quietly, we've arrived at the part of this conversation where words stop being useful. I suppose we have. The churchyard goes very still. The wind, which had been moving soft through the elm branches a moment ago, seems to hold itself entirely. Because this isn't a robbery anymore. Isn't 3 drifters testing an unguarded farm. This is years of training facing itself across 20 feet of consecrated ground. And both of them know, with the particular certainty only 2 people who have studied the exact same discipline could know, that whatever happens next will happen faster than either of them can fully track. You understand? Vane says, quiet, almost gentle, that I taught you everything you know. I understand that better than anyone alive. Then you understand there's no advantage in this for you. I know every habit you carry, every hesitation, every tell your body has ever shown under pressure. Addie's hand resting easy near her hip doesn't move yet. Won't. Not until the exact moment it needs to. You taught me everything you know, she says. Except one thing. And what's that? You never taught me what it feels like to have something worth protecting more than the job itself. Her voice drops, low, final, carrying every ounce of the 2 years she spent building a life he tried to burn down to ash. You built a weapon, Silas. But somewhere along the way, without your permission, that weapon became a mother. And a mother doesn't hesitate the way a weapon does. His hand moves first. She's faster. The shot that follows isn't clean the way her shots against Deacon Ross's men were clean days ago, precise and merciful, and calculated to disarm rather than kill. This one carries years of buried grief behind it. 2 years of careful mourning, a debt finally, completely called due. Vane goes down hard. The pistol falling from a hand that never quite finished clearing his coat, and for a long, terrible moment, the only sound in the churchyard is his ragged breathing and the distant, frantic pounding of hooves. Otis, breaking cover. Whitfield close behind him, both men arriving too late to have changed anything and exactly in time to witness how it ended. Addie crosses the 20 feet between them slowly, pistol still raised, steady, unwavering, and looks down at the man who built her into something capable of ending him. Addie, Vane says, voice thin now, blood dark against his coat in the fading light. For what it's worth. It isn't, she says. Not anymore. He doesn't finish whatever apology, or justification, or final careful calculation he'd been reaching for. His eyes go still, fixed on the gray autumn sky above the churchyard, and Silas Vane, the man who named her, trained her, and finally, in trying to erase her, gave her every reason to become exactly dangerous enough to end him, goes quiet in the same ground where her husband already rests. Whitfield reaches her first, swinging down from his horse with an urgency that has nothing to do with danger anymore, and everything to do with the particular fear of a man who thought he might arrive too late to matter. Addie. His voice, rough, careful. You hurt? No. She lowers the pistol slowly, hand steady even now, even after. It's done, Caleb. He looks past her, toward the body, lying still in the churchyard grass, toward a story he's going to spend a long time working out how to write into any official record that will make sense to anyone who reads it afterward. I'll need a full account, he says, finally gently. The same words he used days ago, standing in her yard over 3 trussed and frightened men. Eventually. Not tonight. Eventually, Addie agrees. Otis arrives a moment later, breathless, rifle still gripped tight in shaking hands, and the look on his young face when he finally takes in the full scene, the fallen man, the steady widow, the particular gravity of an ending years in the making, is one she suspects he'll carry with him for the rest of his life. Mrs. Marsh. His voice cracks on her name. I'm sorry. For all of it. I should have come to you the first night. That man approached me. You came to me before it cost anyone their life, Otis. That's what matters. She reaches out, rests a hand briefly on his shoulder, the same steadying gesture she's offered Jonah 1,000 times. Your sister's debts. We'll see them handled properly. No more shadows attached to it. His eyes fill, and he nods, unable to manage words for a long moment, and Addie lets him have the silence, because some griefs, even the guilty kind, even the kind a person brings, partly on themselves, deserve room to breathe before anyone rushes to close them over. It's full dark by the time everything that needs doing has been done. Whitfield's careful, quiet arrangements for the body, a story constructed that will hold up under whatever scrutiny the territory's distant authorities might eventually bring to bear, a version of the truth honest enough to satisfy the law without exposing every buried piece of who Addie once was. She rides home slowly alone, the churchyard gate creaking closed behind her one final time, and finds Jonah waiting on the porch with the farmhand's wife who'd agreed, that evening, to sit with him until she returned. He runs to her the moment she dismounts, Small's arms wrapping tight around her waist, and she kneels down to meet him properly, holding him the way she has held him through every hard night of these past 2 years. Is it over? He asks, quiet, uncertain, older in that single question than any C6-year-old should have to sound. Addie thinks of the ravine, of the ridge, of a folded letter and a photograph gone soft as cloth, and a name she buried once, deliberately, and dug back up when the world refused to let it stay buried. Yes, baby, she says, and means it completely, for the first time in 2 long years. It's over. He doesn't ask anything more. Doesn't need to. He simply presses his face into her shoulder the way he has 100 times before, and Addie holds him there in the cold porch light, breathing in the ordinary smell of him, wood smoke and boy, and the faint sweetness of the peppermint stick Whitfield keeps in his desk jar, and lets herself finally feel the whole enormous weight of the last 2 years settle, gently, into something she can finally set down. Inside, the fire is banked low but still glowing, and the farmhand's wife has left a plate of bread and cold beef on the table. And the ordinary, unremarkable business of a Tuesday evening waits for her exactly where she left it, patient and undisturbed, as if nothing at all had happened out past the churchyard gate. She carries Jonah up to bed, tucks the quilt beneath his chin, and stands in the doorway a long moment, watching him drift towards sleep with the easy, uncomplicated trust of a child who has never once had reason to doubt that morning will come. Morning always comes. That at least has never once been a lie. Winter comes early that year, the first real snow arriving less than a week after the churchyard, and Addie watches it settle soft and white over the fence posts she mended weeks ago, over the well where she still rises before the rooster most mornings, over a farm that has finally, after everything, stopped waiting for the next threat to arrive out of the fog. In town, a few days after word of what happened at the churchyard makes its careful, half-true rounds, Josiah Kettle finds her outside the general store, hat in his hands, none of his old smooth confidence anywhere in his manner. "Mrs. Marsh." He clears his throat. "I expect you'll have no further trouble from me about the East acreage. Man ought to know when an offer's become an insult, even if it took him a while to see it." "Thank you, Mr. Kettle." "No," he says, and there's something almost like respect in it now, hard-won and unpolished. "Thank you for handling something out here I never once understood the shape of." He touches his hat and walks on, and Addie watches him go. One more small door in Harlow Creek finally, quietly closing the way it should have closed a long time ago. She keeps the wooden box on the shelf above the hearth. The badge, tarnished silver, catches the firelight some evenings the way old things do when they've finally been allowed to simply exist instead of being buried. The photograph she burns. Eventually, on a cold night in early December, watching Silas Vane's careful, unsmiling face curl and blacken, and finally disappear into the hearth's glow. Not out of hatred, out of release. Otis stays on through the winter, works harder than she's ever seen him work. And something in the careful, earnest way he carries himself now suggests a young man determined to spend the rest of his years earning back a trust he understands deeply, he nearly threw away. His sister's debts are settled quietly, through channels Whitfield helps arrange, and the shadow that once hung over the boy's shoulders lifts, slowly, the way winter eventually always gives way to spring. Whitfield rides out often that season, more often than official business strictly requires, and if Addie notices the particular care he takes in choosing his visits, never intruding, always welcome, always ready to leave the moment she needs quiet, instead of company, she says nothing about it. Not yet, content to let whatever this slow, careful thing between them is take exactly as long as it needs. And some evenings, sitting by the fire with Jonah asleep upstairs and the wind moving soft against the shutters, Addie lets herself remember all of it, the girl her father taught to shoot before he taught her anything else. The woman Silas Vane, built out of raw material and careful cruelty. The widow this whole town once believed was one bad season from ruin. All of them her. All of them true in their own way. But none of them, she understands now, more true than the woman sitting here tonight. Fire crackling low, farm settled and safe beneath a fresh blanket of snow, a boy sleeping soundly upstairs, who will grow up never quite knowing the full weight of what his mother once was, or the full weight of what she became, again briefly, fiercely, to keep him safe. Because that's the thing nobody in Harlow Creek ever understood about the widow Marsh. Back when pity was the only lens the town knew how to look at her through. They saw a woman alone, and assumed alone meant weak. Assumed a farm without a husband was a farm waiting to fail. Assumed grief and softness were the same thing, worn by the same kind of person, incapable of anything sharper underneath. They were wrong. Not because grief isn't real, it is. Achingly, permanently real, a weight she still carries some mornings, without warning, without cause, simply because love like that never fully sets down its full weight, not even after the debt attached to it has been settled. But wrong because softness and strength were never opposites to begin with, because the same steady hands that mend a fence and hold a frightened child and bury a husband can also, when the moment demands it, become something the whole world underestimates at its own considerable peril. Some mornings now, standing at the well before the rooster even bothers to try, Addie Marsh looks out at the thinning gray light and finds, for the first time in longer than she can properly measure, that she isn't bracing herself against what the fog might be hiding. She's simply watching the sunrise, the way anyone would, the way she always, finally deserved to. She was Dee once. She is Addie Marsh now, and always. And somewhere in the quiet space between those two names, in the small ordinary miracle of a boy asleep upstairs and a fire burning low in a farm, finally, completely safe beneath a fresh blanket of snow, she has found something neither name, on its own, ever quite managed to offer her. Peace, earned, chosen, hers. There will be other winters. She knows that now the way she knows the weight of a rifle, or the exact number of steps between any door and any window in any room she's ever stood in. Grief doesn't finish. It just learns, eventually, to sit quietly in a chair by the fire, instead of pacing the whole house at midnight. And somewhere down the years, she suspects, there will be other threats too, smaller ones, ordinary ones, the kind every farm and every family eventually has to weather, storms and sickness and hard seasons that have nothing to do with old names or old debts. She isn't afraid of those the way she once was. Because she has learned this autumn the one lesson that outlasts every other lesson either of the men who shaped her ever managed to teach her, not her father, with his steady hands and his careful warnings about the dark, not Silas Vane, with his patience and his precision and his terrible, calculated cruelty. The lesson is simply this, that a woman can be gentle and dangerous in the very same breath, and the world's failure to imagine both at once has never once been her failure to correct. Let them underestimate her. Let the whole of Harlow Creek keep believing, for as long as it likes, that the widow Marsh is one bad season from ruin. She knows better now. She has always known better. And on the mornings when the fog rolls in thick across the fence posts, the way it always has, the way it probably always will, Addie Marsh no longer stands at the well, bracing herself against what it might be hiding. She simply waits for it to thin, the way it always does, and lets the light find her exactly where she's standing.